I used to spend a great deal of time working in a vet clinic, and let's just say, well, it had its fair share of paranormal occurrences. Seems pretty obvious, right? Ghostly activity would be abundant in a place where animals are put to sleep, and their souls potentially left to wander the old halls of this facility. However, there's a lot more variety contained in this particular clinic that isn't limited to just animal encounters. Sightings of previous human spirits have been known to linger years after departing Earth. A dark history is also associated with this place, a sinister energy that I can't really put my finger on. When the place is thriving during the working hours and is populated by staff, animals being housed in the kennels, and clients, the atmosphere is very loving. However, late into the night, after the business closes and the doors lock, it takes on a different kind of energy, especially when you're left alone, something that I've spent a great deal of time doing, since I often work closing shifts. The clinic was founded way back in the early 1950s, and had seen its fair share of staff, ranging from kennel workers, veterinary technicians, to veterinarians. The biggest rumor I've heard since being employed here is the story of Dr. Fleming. When the business originally opened in the 1950s, he was one of the first vets to be working there, and he was more than a little unsavory. That's because this man was truly repulsive, as he had a reputation of treating the animals like crap that stayed in the kennels. It started with the mistreatment of dogs that would stay, where he would take his aggression out on the animals when he had a bad day, kicking, hitting, etc. You'd think that someone would say something eventually, right? Well, from what I've been told, everyone kept their mouth shut because he was such a great veterinarian. He did his job very well, right up until he had enough of his life, when at that point, he just snapped. A client had come in to get a checkup for their dog, and he went into an exam room. The dog wasn't cooperating with him, and he started screaming at the dog. When the staff rushed in to see what was going on, he pulled out a gun and aimed it at the dog for a second, before pulling the gun on himself, and that was the end of his life. Unfortunately, I can't confirm if this was just an old legend to explain the ghost hauntings, but everybody, from the current longtime staff to the boss, all say this happened, and the staff before them had told them this to be factual, so this story was passed on over the years, and it's 2015 now. My boss even told me of a story in which she saw the ghost of Dr. Fleming at night, while she was at the clinic, by herself, and alone, with nobody else with her. It was just after 11 p.m., and she had to run to get something that she left at the clinic earlier in the day. She drove over to the clinic, and the lights in the lobby were left on before she walked in. Not thinking much of it, she dismissed it, thinking maybe one of the staff members had left on the lights accidentally. The weird thing is, as soon as she walked into the building, the lights in the front lobby shut off by themselves for about 20 seconds. My boss turns the light back on. That freaked her out a little bit, as again, she knew nobody was there. So she's walking down the narrow hallway, and all the way at the end, she sees a figure move into the last exam room, at the end of the hallway. It was a cloudy figure, almost like a shadow person. Now get this, after she saw whatever that thing was, the light in the exam room turned on, and then off. That room was supposedly the same one where the incident with Dr. Fleming took place. I didn't want to believe her at first, but then again, I feel the energy in that clinic all the time after hours, and it is not a peaceful energy. It feels like ghosts are roaming the halls. In my personal experience, I never saw anything, but I've heard ghostly growls that didn't sound like cats or dogs, or any animal for that matter, as I was closing up the clinic. I remember my coworkers had left for the night, and it was just me. Out of nowhere, a very low guttural growl, almost human-like, was heard as I was sitting down at the reception desk. It sounded like it came from the staff room just down the hall nearby. I walked into the staff room, turned the lights on, and there was nothing there. Some staff members say that they heard voices after closing, the sounds of light footsteps in the hall, and knocks on the walls. One staff member even claimed that they saw a ghost face staring back at them in the mirror. The clinic is a privately owned practice located in the countryside of Michigan, effectively a business with small, intimate staff where everybody knows each other very well. In fact, the current boss lives in a house that is literally right next to the clinic, a few feet away. A countryside home that has existed long before the vet clinic has even existed, dating back to before the 1880s. Maybe all those ghostly occurrences and paranormal instances start with this house, and it oozes into the vet clinic. That's my story. Hope you enjoyed. It is nice to know that there is someone who will not tell me I am insane. I've had several experiences that I would describe as otherworldly. For about the first 14 years of my life, I lived in an old farmhouse about 3 miles outside of a small town in Tennessee. From my earliest memories, I could remember that the bedroom in the back of my house had an odd feeling to it. I still have no clue as to what was in that room, but it did not like me. Early in my childhood, I also had what my parents called imaginary friends. That seemed very real to me. That seemed to go away around the time I entered kindergarten, at around age 5. I have vague memories of these friends. They talked to me, but I never saw a form, just a voice, and they always seemed nice. I don't know if anything had to do with what was in that room, but whatever it was definitely not nice. This room was my parents' bedroom. It was located behind the kitchen and was adjacent to my room, which I shared with my older brother until I graduated from high school. There was a doorway between the two rooms. Every time I went into this room, I would get an uneasy feeling, as if something was watching me. Although this bothered me, I was sure it was just my imagination. Anyway, around the time of my invisible friends, my parents went away, and I started having these weird dreams about the room. At first, they were just me being in the room, and then it seemed with each subsequent dream, it seemed they got more and more disturbing. Finally, this culminated into a dream in which I had dozens of times about some kind of entity dragging me into that room. It always started with me being in my room, and I would hear something from the other room, and although I would never see what it would seem to have me by the feet and attempt to drag me into that room. I would try to scream, and either nothing would come from my mouth, or it would be very low muffled scream that I could barely hear myself. It seemed that this dream would occur very often, but with no regular pattern. Sometimes I would have it multiple times in one night. I never saw what it was that was trying to drag me into that room, but it felt sinister. Somehow I seemed to know that if it was successful in getting me into that room, that I would die, or worse. I tried to tell people in my family, and most of them said that I was letting my mind play tricks on me, or it was just a bad dream. My mother never said these things and always tried to avoid the subject if I brought it up. So after a while, I just dealt with it. I still had these dreams, but I tried to convince myself that it was just nightmares. These dreams kept going on and around the time I was 13, and in the 8th grade, I got my first girlfriend. She also had uneasy feelings in that room. I'm not sure where she got it, but she came over one day with a Ouija board. I was skeptical about this and thought it was a game. Well, until about 10 minutes into playing it. It said some things that there was no way she would have known that would have occurred in my childhood. It also said some things about a bad man who was near. I took it to be referring to what was in that room. After this, I was sure that they were real. I was getting into that cocky, brave, invincible teenager mode that kids always seem to have. I decided I wanted to know more. This house was situated on a lot in front of and next to 2 large grain fields. About 100 yards or so to the left of our house, there was another house that had been partially burned and was then converted into a shed for a tractor. I'd never really explored this shed before becoming a shed. This was a house that some of my relatives lived in. This was about all I knew about it. One day, my girlfriend and I were walking from our house, which was about 2 miles away, and it started to rain. Well, although not far from my house, it started to rain pretty hard, so we decided to wait for it to slack up some before we walked the football field length from there to my house. We went in, and almost immediately I got a similar uneasy feeling that I knew pretty well by now. She asked me what was wrong, and all I could say that something about this place isn't right. She went into her backpack and came out with the Ouija board. I thought, oh well, it's daylight, and oh well, it couldn't really hurt us. We started, and after a few minutes of unintelligible letters, it stopped, and the air seemed to get colder. I didn't know at the time that there was none of the signs of spirits being around. Anyway, she said, "Is anyone there?" And it almost immediately slid to yes, and stopped. Then we asked some random questions, and got the unexpected answers. The rain had slacked up, and we decided to go on to my house. A few days later, we decided that something was definitely odd about that old half-burned house. We ventured back. This time we went into the mid-afternoon, and it was a hot summer day. I think this was in mid-June, and it was really hot outside. We went in and announced ourselves, making mention that we talked a few days before. Nothing seemed odd. We were just trying to see if we could get some confirmation that something was there without using the Ouija board. Nothing happened, so we took out the board and lit some candles because it was a little dark, but there was a little light that peeked in through the holes in the roof. We started to try to ask some questions about who or what was in the area and such. At first, the spirit we were talking to seemed nice and unthreatening, but it said that it must leave, and almost immediately, the room became cold again, as it had done the previous time. It was at least 80 degrees outside, and in this room, it seemed to drop 20 degrees almost instantaneously. This was startling, because the last time we wrote that off as being wind from the rain outside. Again, we asked stupid questions, and then we asked for her name, and it spelled either evil or devil. It happened so fast, so we're not 100% sure. Either way, this freaked us out, and I was pretty sure whatever this was either the same thing that was tormenting my dreams, or related to it. It then told me some disturbing stuff. I don't want to get into it, but it was not pleasant, and really scared me. So we stopped. When we went to put the board up, the blanket was really hot. This thing was made of plastic, and it was hot enough to almost burn you. But the plastic didn't melt or show any outward signs of the heat, only when you touched it. This really scared us, and we got the heck out of there. Later that summer, my parents separated and we moved to a town about 10 miles north of where we were living. After we moved, the dreams started to go away. Several years had passed, and I decided that I wanted to know what went on at that place. I asked my mom if she'd ever experienced anything strange there. She had lived there after my parents were married up until the time they split up, so I was sure that if something was there, I was not the only one to experience it. Well, she told me that she felt the same uneasy feeling about the room that I had felt. She said that she always felt like someone was watching her in there. She said that she had never told anyone, because my dad said she was crazy, that he had never had anything like that happen. So then I asked about the shed. She said that my uncle lived there until he died, and then the house burned. I asked if anyone was hurt in the fire, but she said that no one was there when it burned. I told her about the experiences with the Ouija board, and she got a weird look on her face. And then she told me about some of the stuff that happened before I was born. She didn't give me specifics about names, but she said I had some relatives whose house burned down, and their children died in the fire. Their bodies were laid out in the house before the funeral. She also said that it was suspected that the fire that killed the 3 children was set for insurance money. I don't know if it was their spirits or something else, but after we moved, the dream stopped, and everything seemed to be normal. I say normal, but I still have paranormal experiences where I will see people not there, or other odd things. I've now felt a presence like the one in the room since then, and I never want to feel anything like that again. I never quite figured out what that was, or if the events were related. These dreams traumatized me as a child, and although I don't feel that I need answers to it, I just felt I needed to share the account of what happened with others, hoping that it would help. In closing, I wouldn't recommend anyone ghost hunting as I did. Whatever it was, the Ouija board seemed agitated. At first it seemed that we were connected by a somewhat friendly entity. Then it would leave, and the mean would come. I still live close to that home, about 10 miles away, but I haven't ventured back in like 7 years, maybe longer. I'm 25 now, and I've done a lot of research into the paranormal, and I know now what I did was stupid. Anyway, thanks for listening to me ramble on about my childhood. Hope this helps someone else. I now own the hospital, and it is utterly amazing. We have heard sounds of something working on the boiler late at night that even draw the attention of our many animals. There is a faint humming in one wing of the hospital, though there is no electrical power to the building. I've personally seen a little boy who I thought was coming down the hallway to the house in the back to see my daughter. I called to him in the twilight that she was out front and started to walk towards him. As I got closer, I realized he was on the stairs on the side of the building and disappeared out of sight. When I reached that point, we have taken pictures of the windows and have been able to bring up the face of a young woman with prominent cheekbones and a pointed chin, with long curly hair with an elderly gentleman in the background. On Photoshop, we magnified the image. The picture was taken in a stairwell that is 12 feet off the floor. There are many orbs around the building, and a local newspaper reporter and photographer who did a story on it this past Halloween photographed a white mist in a second floor window that seemed to be a focus point to some residents of town, giving them an uneasy feeling when they drive by. The previous owner had tried to change a portion of the second floor wing, but left everything in the middle of the construction and moved far away without selling the place first. He has never mentioned anything to us, but it is obvious something made him uncomfortable because he just wanted out. We feel nothing but peacefulness when we are in the building and are hoping to gain landmark status to protect the building. Many people died here during the 1947 tornado, since it was the only point of refuge for the town. We consider it hallowed ground and are supported by the many people who have an attachment to the building for various reasons. We are amazed by the amount of people who travel from different states who are born here, who just want to visit it. It is a compelling piece that we hope to preserve. My name is Jessica, and I live about 12 miles outside of a little town called Berlin in Somerset, Pennsylvania. When I was a little girl growing up down in the middle of nowhere, I heard ghost stories all the time. There is one where a man walks what we call the mountain road with a lantern, looking for his lost love who got lost in the woods. I never believed in the stories or ghosts until one night I went for a walk with my dog. Usually my dog was trailing behind me, but this time she was going in front of me, acting as if she didn't want me to walk any closer to the barn or the light, but I kept pushing her aside and kept walking towards the light. I had my earphones on and I was listening to music. I got a feeling that I wasn't alone, so I took my earphones on and turned the music off. I listened very quietly, and as soon as I was able to yell out "Who's there?", I heard what to me sounded like an old covered wagon up the field. I couldn't see anything, but I could hear it. I heard a whistle and the sound of hooves hitting the ground and the wheels turning. My dog started to bark, and I got scared and ran into the home. The next day I went to the field where I thought the sound of the wheels were coming from, and there were hoof prints and wheel tracks. I followed them for about 5 minutes, and then they just vanished. It was like they just disappeared. The tracks stopped. Then I started to follow them back to where I was, and the same thing happened. I got to the point where I'd heard them, and started to follow them back for about 5 minutes, and they disappeared. Sadly, I didn't get any photos, but I showed my mom and dad. None of us could explain it. Here's a nightmare I had one night. It's very scary, so brace yourself. One night in the cold, harsh winter of the snow belt in Cleveland, Ohio, I was making my tea, waiting until it was done steeping. As I finished watching my nightly program, I slowly limped to my cold, damp room. Hence, my heating ducts aren't very good, and my room is on the complete opposite side of my house, away from my furnace, and on the outskirts of the other bedrooms. As I arrived in my room, I turned on a portable heater, let my Harrier dog in, and limped over to my bed, and crawled under the blankets and flannel sheets. It was a freezing night, and my bed was freezing. As I went half asleep, I remember my mother walking in and turning off my heater. After that, I was completely emboweled in the satisfying darkness of slumber. I was sound asleep, and not to be disturbed until my own cries of horror awakens me. As I sit watching TV, too vague to tell what program it was, I was merely amused watching it. Lesser the fact that it seemed that there was no screen that I could make out. I zoned everything out. As my mother walks into the kitchen from my long outstretched foyer, the foyer seemed like it was 50 feet long. A great chandelier hanging from the sky, expensive wall murals, and a marble floor, which was mixed in with red. She greets me with a mere kiss on the cheek and a brief conversation. She persuaded me into my dining room, which was empty with beige carpeting, white walls, and a chandelier on the ceiling. She leads me to a window where we look out into the unknown. As we stare into the forest, we notice nightfall is soon to come, and it is just past dusk. The clouds look like they are about to have a long blizzard. As we scan down the sky, I notice that there's already an inch of snow on the ground. The trees were all leafless, and they looked dead because it was that time of the season. As we just stare into the edge of our land and into the rest of the deep weald, we notice how gothically beautiful it looks. Just then, we notice a slight change in the landscape. We see deer scattering about, especially away from a certain side of the timberland. Just then, we hear a blood-curdling scream. The scream you hear when somebody's in excruciating pain and agony. It lasts for about 5 seconds and dies out. I tremble in my dream, even though it does not seem like it. I look at my mother, and she does not make a sound. We stare into the unknown. We look into the woodlot and hear the cry for help again, and it ceases after 5 seconds, then recites. Finally, she grabs my arms and takes me to my room. We sit in there and keep getting these haunting phone calls of a man screaming, "You're next, you're next." She solemnly hangs up and has a trace of fear across her face. Suddenly, the scream is much closer to my bedroom window. Suddenly, I awaken with a jolt. I feel a cold sweat run down my back and notice that my breath shows up in midair. My furry little friend is in a little ball next to me, which means it was too cold for him too. I'm too afraid to fall back into sedation, so I stay awake and stay alert to any little noise in the home. As the clock turns 6 a.m., I wake up and wander into life before dawn. Everything is dark and I can't see, so I turn on the television. I make a cup of morning tea and tremble as I drink it. As I walked out to the bus, I couldn't help hearing the screams in my head and being terrified walking down a 50-foot driveway surrounded by timber. I've had a few experiences as a child, probably being less than 8 years of age, give or take. I found some little glass thing that I liked, and I was playing with it. I don't know what I was fascinated about it with, but I was a child. I lost it, and I woke up that night to go to the bathroom, and there it was on the bathroom counter. I didn't know how it had gotten there. I walk out in the hallway to go back to bed, and I see a figure run into my room. I run into my room, looking under my closet, under my bed, and all over. I find nothing. I go into my brother's room. He's still asleep, and see nothing else. I suppose the figure was returning the object to me. Who knows? Another time, I guess I woke up my mother to get me something to drink. After we went down the stairs and turned a corner to go to the kitchen, I'm behind her, and as she is about to go to the other room, I see a little boy, probably about my age at the time, and dressed in old-style clothes. I don't know, maybe 17th or 18th century clothes, just old. I asked my mother if she just saw that, and she said, "No, Bradley. What did you see?" I told her what I had just seen, and she didn't tell me it was my imagination or anything. She believed me. She says that many people in the family have seen things from time to time like that. I've seen other things in those days. My memory is a little shady about them, but those are my two best remembered. For some reason, I was somewhat scared of what I saw. I don't know why. Maybe because they were so sudden and gone so quickly. I would only see them for about 2 or 3 seconds, and they would just disappear as quickly as they appeared. I did live across the street from a cemetery, and someone we sold something to at a garage sale said the plot of land we lived on used to be a cemetery. An old one, judging by the clothes the boy was wearing. An old girlfriend sent me a link to this site, and I thought I would check it out. I came across the link, Children and Ghosts, and I thought I would give you my thoughts after reading it. I stopped seeing these things when I guess I just got a little scared, and just said to myself, I don't want to see these things anymore. After that, I hadn't seen a thing. I don't know if that's a good thing or not. I'm not sure if I wouldn't mind seeing anything these days. I worked at a funeral home for 6 months and saw a lot of sadness and some gruesome things as well. People seem to be most upset when someone takes their own life, more so than a murder even. I got out of that because there is no money in it. It is because of those experiences that I do believe in life after death. Well, I hope I didn't make this message too long. I hope what I told you was helpful to you in some way. Well, let me first explain. I'm not psychic. I don't think that I'm particularly sensitive. I know that some of my friends and I in high school did mess around with some stuff. Ouija boards, going to cemeteries, etc. That wasn't the brightest of ideas, but it wasn't meant to be harmful. For whatever reason, I seem to attract this kind of energy. My parents had bought a house in a brand new development in West Windsor, New Jersey, in 1992. It was built on a former sod farm. Nothing too strange that we knew about. From the very beginning, I'd gotten weird vibes and sensations there, that something just wasn't right. My grandmother's sister, who was very sensitive, did not like coming over, that she never felt comfortable there. I never saw anything outright when I lived there, but I always got some strange vibes. My late grandmother did have a frightening experience. She had fallen asleep watching TV in the family room and awoke around 2 a.m. to 2 men standing in front of her. She screamed, and they were gone. I would get sensations of cold spots in certain spots in the home, especially in the front room. A lot of misery befell my family when they lived there too. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe not. In 1994, I lived for a brief time at 50 Main Street in Roebling. It was once a doctor's office, and I believe a post office at one point in time. I had many strange experiences in that home. My husband was going to school at night and worked full-time, so I was there by myself a lot. There was a room that was used for storage between our kitchen and the garage. I never wanted to be in there by myself. It was a very oppressive feeling, and I had a hard time breathing when I would be in there. There had been several times when I was doing laundry in the basement that I felt as if someone was standing behind me. Every so often I would catch a glimpse of an older, heavy-set woman outside. Since there was an alley directly behind the house, I assumed it was a neighbor. Apparently, no one alive in the neighborhood fit the description. The one thing that did me in was the 3rd floor. When my husband lived there as a teenager, he and his brother shared it, and his brother had put mirrors along one whole wall. For whatever reason, I was never able to look at those mirrors. I don't know if I was afraid of what I'd see or what, but I never could. I had originally planned on making the other room there into my sewing room. One afternoon, I was up sweeping when I felt as if someone was in the room with me. I knew I was home alone. It was such a palatable presence. I started to pray out loud. I basically did the rosary, but the feeling did not subside. I did not feel evil. It was just very oppressive. Needless to say, I was grateful when my mother-in-law sold the home and we had to move. As an aside, I grew up in Ridgewood, Bergen County, and I think that it is a one haunted town. There is something very evil in the cemetery across from Ben Franklin Jr., and I knew people would mess around with that stuff that they should have not stirred something up there. One night, we were all hanging out across the street by Ben Franklin Jr., and then I went home. I parked in my parents' garage. I was 17 or 18 at the time, and for some strange reason, the car backed itself out of the garage and landed directly over a ditch. It was like it had perfectly aligned itself to go there. The high school is haunted too. There used to be a room off the auditorium in the tower that was always 10 degrees cooler than anywhere else in the school. Of course, this is where we would go to smoke on a rainy day. There would just be a strange feeling in there. I don't know of any stories behind the building. It just might be a natural energy field or something. Finally, I used to work at the Borders in West Windsor. The shopping center that the store is located in was built over swampland where a bunch of kids from Trenton had drowned on Christmas night when they were fleeing police in a stolen car. The accident happened around 10 p.m. at night. Apparently where the back room in the store is was not too far away from the accident where it happened. There were many times we would hear things outside at night on the loading dock. Of course, when we would open the door, there would be nothing. A lot of times, and especially after 10 p.m., it would be very creepy going back there. I know that some other employees said that they had seen things back there. I never saw anything. I just got weird feelings. I've never really shared any of these stories with anyone before, but I feel like you guys won't do anything to exploit them or make fun of me. When I was 15 years old, I used to frequently babysit from a next door neighbor who has 5 children. It was a Friday night at about 10 p.m. I just put the children to sleep in their bedrooms upstairs. I stayed up for a while watching a few late night shows. At about midnight, I found myself restless and decided to wash the dishes from that evening's dinner. About 10 minutes into washing, I heard footsteps behind me. Without turning around, I said, "You're supposed to be sleeping." I received no response and turned slightly to my right, and out of the corner of my eye, I seen the outline of a little boy with dark hair, dressed in a t-shirt and shorts, and white tennis shoes. I turned back to the dishes, and was about to repeat myself, when the hair on the back of my neck started to go up, and a shiver went down my back. I quickly realized that the little boy I had just seen was not one of the children. I turned completely about to find nobody there. I quickly walked through the kitchen to the living room and up the stairs, where I found all the children sleeping soundly in their beds. There is no way that any of the children could have ran back up the stairs and back into their beds within 5 seconds, and also without me hearing anything. My proof of what I had seen was real, is that all of the children were wearing pajamas, and not one of them had on shorts. Well, this didn't exactly happen to me, but it happened to my grandmother and her mother in the 40s in Brazil. My grandmother was young, and she had just bought her first house with my grandfather, and she had 2 little daughters. My aunts, obviously. My father wasn't even born yet. My grandmother isn't a person to lie, so this story is no bull. Well, it was around 1945, and my grandmother was preparing food in the kitchen for my aunts. My grandfather was at work, so she was alone with her 2 daughters. She heard footsteps coming down the living room and down the hall. She thought that was strange because my grandfather wouldn't come home. Only 5 hours later, she went to greet him, but instead was greeted by a terrible cold gust of wind. She shrugged it off and went on with her life. But until the next day, she was cooking for my 2 aunts. My oldest aunt was around 5, and the second was around 2. She heard the same footsteps, and she noticed that it was always at the end of her mother's room. My great-grandmother would sleep there sometimes. She grabbed her 2 daughters and waited outside for my grandfather to come. This would always happen at lunchtime, around 12 p.m. Well, my grandfather was always skeptical when it came to ghosts, so he comforted her and told her he was hearing things. She believed him and went on. The next day, my great-grandfather went to sleep there. She would sleep there to help out my grandmother with the girls, and the footsteps still came, but my grandmother felt safe because she was with her mother and 2 daughters, so she didn't mind it. At night, my great-grandmother was sleeping, and she felt the bed go down as if someone was sitting down on it. Then, she felt a hand caressing her face. She got the heck out of there and never returned to that house. They lived there for 2 years. Soon after my father was born, they moved. So that's my story. I do not believe she was lying because she isn't a person to lie about that. Thank you. My first story begins when I lived in Ohio, USA. I was driving back to my house one day with my friends when I saw a girl visiting a graveyard. She was right at the top by a statue of an angel. The girl looked very young, about 11 years old. She was wearing old-fashioned clothes. I went up to the grave the next day. The inscription was written on the angel's Bible. It said in memory of Jane Doe, died 1832 to 1845, died of tuberculosis. I did not use the girl's name out of respect. I now realize that yesterday I'd seen a ghost. I can see the graveyard from where I live, and I always see a girl visit the grave. One time I went up there to see if I could catch a glimpse of the girl. This time, she was bending over 2 other graves. I went away because I thought the girl was starting to sense my presence. I came back though, and found the 2 graves. These 2 were her mother and father. They had also died of tuberculosis. It looked like no one came and took care of this grave, so I would come up there sometimes and clean the graves. When I had finished cleaning the girl's grave one day, I looked up and saw the girl watching me. She was smiling. She followed me home. I wasn't bothered because I knew she was harmless. It was almost like she was an old friend to me. This second set of experiences happened in Wrightwood, California. The interesting thing about the area in particular is that there are constant reported sightings of Indians everywhere. And the women in my family see an older woman around our houses, near the children's rooms. Townspeople who are aware of her say she is a nurse of sorts, and that she checks on the small children of the town, protecting them. The weirdest one so far is the half Indian. All that is ever seen is the top half of an Indian, head to waist and floating. Most seem to see this figure especially down by the old ranch that sits in Cajun Pass, on Highway 66, between Clegherd Road and Kenwood. That's where the figure would appear. Many times around Thanksgiving, which makes you wonder a little bit. Anyway, my sister has seen him on Lone Pine Ranch Road around Clyde Ranch, the only structure on Lone Pine, until you reach Wrightwood. We have a lot of paranormal activity happening constantly, according to those who are tuned into it, or have that sixth sense. And if one's violent or sudden death brings about that type of activity, then we add approximately 10 spirits every year because of the slippery snow-covered roads like Lone Pine. That, and the lack of common sense that California drivers possess. For years, the ranch my grandpa owns has been the center of many disturbing experiences. Though I did not experience them firsthand, I'm going to tell you some real stories about the place. Now I'm going to start with this ranch was built on an Indian burial ground, or this is what my mom tells me. My mother, Grace, lived there with her dad, sister, and 2 of her brothers. They only lived there part-time. They lived in San Luis Obispo with my grandmother. They'd go to the ranch on weekends along with my grandfather. My grandmother would stay behind because she hated the ranch. On the 4th of July, my mom had her friend come over, and this is when they were older, maybe in their 20s, and she let her stay in the bedroom with the guy she got close to. So my mom ended up on the couch. In the middle of the night, she sat straight up, like in the horror movies, where people sit straight up, all of a sudden in the middle of their sleep. She had no clue why, but she was so scared to death. She started to look around, and out of nowhere, she started seeing little dashes and wisps of silver light. They would fly right over her, and there would be deep wafts of cold air. She got up and ran to the bedroom. The guy my mom's friend got close to worked at the ranch as a gardener, and had experiences like this before seeing he'd worked there a long time. He said he thinks it's an Indian burial ground, but couldn't be sure. When my mom was young, not such great things happened at the ranch. I only know of one, but I'll tell you about it. My grandpa would bring weird friends that he met to the ranch. There was one guy in particular who came, and every time he played a game, where all the boys including my uncle's friends would have to play, it was basically a hide-and-seek game. But when he found them, he would pretend to torture them, and he'd throw them in a pool, which definitely wasn't a pleasant thing. My Uncle Martin was so scared of this guy, and he had good reason. This man was an old Vietnam War veteran. You could pretty much call him crazy. My uncle spent most of his days at the ranch, preparing for when he came. He did not want to be found. He had a place ready on this tree with a little stash of candy bars and packet drinks in the ladder that he could pull up after him. When the man came, he found everyone but Martin and looked for him till it was well past dark. Finally, they found him, but he wouldn't come down, and didn't. I had lived at the ranch for about 6 months, and my mom was scared to death of it, so we moved. My dad had lived with us. There was no power, so matches were common. After we had moved, my mom's younger brother Nick and his wife Shelley moved in. They had my little cousins Larry, the oldest, Amanda, second, and Monica, the youngest. My cousin Larry had gotten hold of matches when he climbed out of the crib he was in with Amanda. He climbed back in and started a fire, not knowing the consequences, being as young as he was. My Aunt Shelley was upstairs taking a nap with Monica, and my Uncle Nick was at work. Shelley came out running out of the building and left Monica outside, running back in to get Larry. It was too late for Amanda, and they still have her ashes. Larry lived, but he has third-degree burns that have scarred him permanently. My uncle divorced Shelley due to other problems in their marriage. He got remarried to another woman named Tracy, and together, they had a child named Caitlin Elizabeth. Just a while ago, they figured out she was deaf. My grandpa lived at the ranch regularly till he broke his back. He was riding his horse on a mountain by a steep ravine. Being an experienced rider, he didn't have much of a risk factor. No one knows what, but something spooked the horse and he fell off, down the ravine, and broke his back. Now he's in a wheelchair, and it seems like he'd rather die than not be able to live at the ranch. So far he's not there, but he's trying to get there. Another bit that interests me about my family's ranch is that it tore my mom's side of the family apart. There have been endless fights about it, and pretty much everyone has turned away from each other. Are all these things a coincidence? I don't know, but I find it hard to think of it that way. I went to Santa Catalina summer camp, but it was also a boarding school. For some reason, there is one room that is never open for boarders. It's at the end of the hall in the 4th dorm, and the story about it was that a girl was going there for senior year and was trying to get into Harvard. When she got the rejection letter, she OD'd on sleeping pills. This happened a year or two after my mom had gone there. When I went there for summer camp, there was a girl who said she had gone in there to turn off a light that was on. This was odd, because no one was allowed to go in there. The two girls were curious about the room and snooped around. When they opened the closet, there was red writing all inside the walls of the closet. They screamed and ran out, telling the counselor what they saw. The counselor was clearly scared out of her mind to go into that room. Before she turned off the light, she checked the closet. The walls were clean. Throughout the nights and days at Catalina, the light would turn on without anyone there. The presence was overwhelming and strong. Sometimes just an eerie feeling. You can't prove it, just feel it. I lived in Springfield, Missouri for 5 years, and have been a frequent visitor to the Wilsons Creek battlefield. The place is a presence that you could feel day or night, because it was the site of a good-sized battle, and the park rangers will tell you the same thing of sightings while they patrolled the park, or hearing gunfire and cannons going off. One of the most active spots in the battlefield is the farmhouse that doubled as the field hospital where the wounded were brought in for amputation in the home. But I believe it was a Confederate hospital, if my memory serves me correctly. Last year in June, myself and a few friends were given permission to camp the night at the location so that we could experience the events reported ourselves. One of my friends got his degree in psychology and wanted to see if the reportings were due to the history of the area, and we confirmed everything the park ranger had told us. At midnight, we began to hear what we could have sworn to be low moaning coming from the house, and what we could have sworn were the shadows of several people passing the windows, as well as the footsteps on the front porch. The footsteps would either sound like someone pacing as if on guard duty or waiting, or it would sound like someone running into the home, such as an orderly or a surgeon. But the one thing that remains in my mind was a smell that suddenly just arose around us of blood. It was a heavy smell that lingered in the air, that just made you almost want to scream, because it had incredible sadness and pain. There was also a constant presence being verified of cold spots, that would allow us to see our breath, and this made it very uncomfortable because it was an 85-degree night. The presence would get stronger throughout the night, and finally, when we composed ourselves, I looked at the house and said as loud as I could, "We know you are with us, and we know the sacrifice that you have made. Please leave this place in peace." My friends, of course, gave me that look that I had lost it, but they immediately noticed that there was a calm feeling now, instead of agitation and sadness. Before we left, we placed a small flag and an American flag that we bought and placed them on either side of the front porch of the field house and gave them a salute out of respect for the soldiers. I've since moved to Florida, but still keep in contact with my friends as well as the park ranger, and we still talk about that night as well as the other occurrences they've seen on return visits. I hope this helps to prove the skeptics that there is a presence of lost life on that site, and that they want us to know how, so what happened to him will not be repeated to others. I lived in my newly built home for 1 year now. It all started when I woke groggy from sleep. I heard a woman crying and thought perhaps it was my child or neighbor. Her husband would travel often. I realize now that it was a linked experience. It was a couple of days ago, and I'd stayed up late watching TV, started to get tired, and decided to go to sleep. So I walked upstairs and went to my bedroom, laid down, and was fast asleep. I remember dreaming, and the woman that I heard for a year crying came to me. She came over me and put one hand on my throat and the other on my mouth and face. She began to strangle me. All I can remember after was willing myself to be awakened. I was flailing, kicking, and trying to scream. That is when I finally awoke. My husband was laying right next to me the whole time. He was also awake after the episode. Scared and wondering what the heck, he told me that I was really screaming and tossing all over. You know when you watch someone sleep, and they say they were screaming, it's always muffled. I wasn't. Tonight, me and my sister were making dinner for all the kids. Hobo dinners to be exact, and we had made all the kids come in one at a time to pick out their ingredients in their own hobo dinner. If you don't know what hobo dinners are, they have an assortment of vegetables and meat, or chicken, and condensed soup wrapped in aluminum foil. We have made the first 3, no hitches. Then came little A, we'll call her that. She picked up her foods and we argued that she had to have more than chicken and broccoli. She didn't want to, but agreed. So I folded hers up and put it into an oven with the other 3, realizing that when I put in the 5th one, I would have to move them all. We then proceeded to make the last one, and we never left the kitchen. Upon finishing, I opened the oven and found that little A's dinner was gone. I put it in there myself, and it was not small, not something you could misplace. We searched the entire kitchen and surrounding areas. No dinner. We made her another one, but couldn't get over the lost hobo dinner. We talked about it for a few hours while our husbands researched the kitchen. Then we started talking of related stories, and the woman came up. We joked that she ate it, or her deceased grandma did. Then I told my sister and her husband of my dream experience. My husband chimed in and finished the dream, but I didn't even know the end. He had said that after he had gotten up the next morning, I came out of our bedroom crying and saying that the ghost tried to suffocate me again. Then he said I proceeded to get a glass of water and went back to my room. That happens to be on the top floor and my kitchen on the main. I didn't know that happened. Then he also started talking about an old forgotten coal mine and how a girl died in one here in Littleton, Colorado. So we went online, and somehow in our main searches, came to this site. Do you think that maybe the deaths of the miners and their families are still here, reminding us of all the injustices they faced in their lives? Or are they just wanting us to take notice and change things? Early last year, me and my youngest daughter was cleaning an empty house to make extra money. Being sensitive to spirit guides, I picked up a presence, but chose to ignore it and clean the home. My daughter kept hearing someone tell her to come upstairs, and she wouldn't do it. As evening approached, we headed upstairs to vacuum the bedrooms. Whatever the presence was, it kept on blocking the vacuum from the wall and threw a marble at the wall also. I also felt a cold hand attempt to brush me down the stairs as I was going from one bedroom to the other. I dropped the vacuum and fled down the stairs, telling whatever it was that we would be back the next day. As we were locking the door, we felt someone on the other side trying to stop us from locking up and leaving. The next day, I lit a white candle and stood at the foot of the stairs. I simply stated we were here to do a job and mean no harm to him. I also said that we would leave as soon as the house is clean. After that, we felt them. They let us do our job. The house is rented now, and I won't step foot on the property anymore. I had a very tall black shadow step on the house's porch and speak to me using telepathy. It told me not to come back to its territory, or else it will push me down the stairs next time. Meaning I have small grandkids. That's fine by me never to go over there again. I'm still not sure what I encountered, but I didn't like it. The new tenants can deal with it. As for me, I don't need the money that bad to come in contact with whatever lives in my neighbor's house. It's been 17 years, but it still happens to this day. It happened on a summer night on the back road connecting Mount Clair to West Milford, known to the locals as Alfie Hill. The area had very few houses at the time, and one house stood out, a brand new gorgeous home right at the crest of the dirt road. The man who lived there built it for his wife, and they had a daughter who was, I believe, around 8 years old at the time. I remember traveling the road, more of a cowpath really, and watching the home being constructed. Once it was finished, it always looked so pristine and happy. But one night, I was coming through this patch, black stretch of land, and saw the mother and daughter in the middle of the road, both in what looked like nightgowns in a mud puddle. I could see them standing there as I approached, and the moon seemed to shine on them alone. When I got to them, they disappeared in front of me. I wasn't alone in the car, so I asked did anyone else just see that, and everyone just sat there, too scared to answer. By the light of day, early, I was crossing back across the hill and saw 6, maybe 7 police cruisers and an ambulance. Crime scene tape everywhere, and one covered figure in the grass by the house, and several officers crouched by the road, beside where the mud puddle was the night before. Apparently the man had long suffered from depression and killed his wife and daughter before running to the house and killing himself. The officers said that they speculated he had committed the act the night prior to them being discovered. Still, on summer nights, you can see the girl and her mom looking down into the middle of the puddle in their nightgowns. My husband Steve, brother, and myself were staying in a condo at Sunrise Village in Killington, Virginia to go skiing. It was in April of this year, and there was a special on the Fox News channel entitled, "Does the Devil Really Exist?" or something of that nature. It must have really affected me, as I later dreamt that my husband and I were before the devil, and he was going to decide which one of our souls to claim. I was making an argument to spare Steve and take me instead. I remember waking up as someone was grabbing my left calf and tugging on it. I looked around and saw my husband was just coming into the bedroom from the bathroom, and he saw my distress as I was waking up and shouting for him to turn on the light as I was waving my hand around me to see if I could detect any cold spots. I enthusiastically read all I can on the paranormal. I vividly recall the hand, fingers and thumb wrapped around my left calf. It was a warm hand, and no, without a doubt, it wasn't my husband's. He was in the bathroom, or my sleeping brother on the living room couch. I was sleeping, tucked in with the sheets and blankets tucked under the mattress. I think whatever it was trying to wake me up from a horrible dream. Perhaps my father, who passed away 5 years ago prior. Don't know. What I do know is that my husband believes it was a dream, and he won't accept any other explanation. This infuriates me to no end. I know it was real. Thanks for listening, and keep up the good work on your website. It's great. I've got another experience I thought you might find interesting. In October of 2006, I got orders to move from Arlington Air Force Base, Alaska, to Peterson Air Force Base, Colorado. My ex-wife and I decided to drive because we didn't want to get to the next station and not have a car. We spent the weekend with her relatives in Wasilla, then made the drive to Haines Junction and stayed the night. We really didn't sleep well that night. The room was rather uncomfortable. So we left at like 500 and began the trip to Canada. We took the Alcan, Alaska-Canada highway and pushed into the Yukon Territory, stopped and had a rather awful lunch, but my daughter, who was a year old, needed to get out of the car for a while. We pulled into White House around 1800 and decided to stop for the night. We chose the Best Western Hotel, mostly due to the military giving us a list of which hotels were best for us to stay in, and that was one. As we were checking in, I noticed a rather cold spot by a cartoony statue of a Canadian Mountie. Mind you, this was October, and things were getting cooler, but not that cold. I believe we had a room on the 6th floor and let my ex-wife and my daughter get settled while I brought in the things we needed for the night. While I was making the trips to the car and back to the room, I learned that this Best Western was once a saloon and brothel. I'd mentioned the cold spot to my ex-wife, and she had stated that when she had made the trip to Alaska in '02, this was 2 years before our marriage, and I did not know her before '03, that she had stayed on the 4th floor and experienced similar cold spots and orbs. Well, we decided to have dinner, then turn in. We had been in the car for over 12 hours, and we sorely needed a seat after the awful night before. My ex-wife said she had forgotten something in the car, and for me to get it, as she was going to give our daughter a bath and put her to bed. I went out from the restaurant in the hotel, and as I was walking in the entrance to the hotel, I kept feeling cold spots in various places. I also felt like someone had brushed up against me, and like a hand on my shoulder. Of course, no one else was around except the front desk clerk. It got stranger as I came back in after getting what it was. I have since forgotten, and got on the elevator again. I got this feeling like I was being watched, or something was there with me. Now, I was the only one in the elevator, but for some reason, it stopped on the 4th floor, and when the doors opened, an odor of tobacco filled the area. This is a non-smoking hotel, and what can be best described as a wet dog smell filtered through the hallway. When I finally got back to the 6th floor, these cold spots seemed more spread out than before, and I swear I saw some floating orbs in the window overlooking Whitehorse. By this time, it was around 1930 to 2000 at night. Of course, when I looked again, nothing was there. I also heard something that sounded like someone banging pots and pans. Obviously, there was no one there, and you weren't allowed to bring such things into the hotel. I got back to her room and told my ex-wife about it, and she said she had a similar experience in '02, without the pots and pans banging noise. We slept the rest of the night without any further disturbances, and decided to head out at 6:30. While I was loading the car, it was still kinda dark outside. I swear, I saw what looked like a prospector from the latter part of the 1890s. Of course, when I looked up, he was gone. When I went back into the lobby near that cartoony Canadian Mountie statue, the cold spot really intensified, and when I got to the area where the elevator was, I saw someone out the window, and I thought nothing of it. But once I got closer to the elevator, I noticed that the person was wearing Victorian-era clothing. He passed by the window and disappeared. Again, I told my ex-wife, and she by now was picking up on animal spirits as she called them, and she was telling me it was time to get moving. But she noticed the intense cold spot by the statue as well, and like our trip to Rika's Roadhouse in Alaska back in '04, she was quick to get out of the hotel with our daughter and get to the car, while I checked out and brought the bags out. Again, I felt something brush against me, and something touched my shoulder. However, this time, the hand felt cold and clammy almost. Of course, I turn around, and no one is there, just that cartoony Mountie statue. We get out of there okay, without any further strangeness, save for a feeling of sorrow. Then, of course, I found out it was a saloon and brothel from the Alaskan Canadian gold rush of 1898, which could explain several things, but it was the first time I actually feared spirits and ghosts, and that was because of my daughter, who was a year old at the time. Again, my ex-wife and I would talk about this till our divorce. It was probably the first time I've ever felt animal spirits. This is a personal experience that happened to me 2 years ago in Charleston, South Carolina. I'm in the Navy and had just got off the swing shift on base, leaving at approximately 11:45 p.m. from the base. The base I was at is on an old plantation's land, but I never thought anything of it. The part where I worked at was on the water of the nearby river, and the road back passed along the river for about a half mile before turning inland. Fog had a tendency to build up on the river in the fall and winter months, and the fog had rolled across the road on this particular night. As I was driving along the road coming back from work, I saw a man running on the side of the road. This was nothing special on a military base. People run all the time to keep up physical condition, but this was almost at midnight, which I found strange, and he was wearing nothing reflective at all, seemingly wearing all dark clothing. As my car came up on him, he immediately darted out in front of the car at a speed I'd never seen before. I slammed on the brakes, but it was too late. I expected to hear and feel a massive thud as I hit this poor fellow, but as the car passed through him, he vanished without a trace. I got out of the car, brights on, searching with my flashlight for a person anywhere around my car, but I was the only one as far as I could see on this road. It scared the living daylights out of me, to the point at which I started searching inside of the car to ensure I did not have a hitchhiker with me now. After getting into the car, I drove as fast as I could, with interior lights on in the car, to the nearest well-lit area, locked the doors, left the lights on, and called my father to relate the incident. After some 20 minutes of consoling me, I finally got my wits about me to drive home. However, it did not end here. From this night on, something was different about my apartment. There was a presence in that place that I haven't felt the months before the incident. I began to review sitting in the living room alone altogether because of feeling like someone was watching me. Out of the corner of my eye, I would see the bathroom light on, clear as day, but when I looked over, it would be off again. It would feel like someone would sit down next to me on the couch, but I was the only one in the apartment. Finally, one weekend my father came out to visit. Growing up with numerous ghostly and at sometimes demonic experiences, most of which he never talks about, he has become highly sensitive to the paranormal. The first day he arrived, he used the key I left him to get in while I was at work. When I got home, having said nothing of my experiences in the apartment to him, the first thing he asked me was if I ever got the feeling someone was in the kitchen area, peeking over the half wall at the television. I froze in my tracks at this. Over the course of his week-long visit, he said he also thought he saw the bathroom light turning itself on and off, and felt someone else sit down on the couch next to him, as well as seeing a shadow of a man mainly around the kitchen area, who would periodically lean over the half wall like he was looking at what was on the television. But he said he never saw or felt anything or anyone in the bedrooms. I now had a reason for my seemingly unfounded paranoia of being in the living room alone. I continued living with this feeling from the night of the incident, driving home through the following few months until I received orders to leave Charleston, and have not felt the presence of the Running Man since then. When I was little, about 5 or 6, we lived in a big house which was originally 2 cottages, later joined together. Although myself and my sister were young at the time and had no personal experiences, my parents told us stories about what happened there when we moved house some years later, as well as the familiar cold spots, creaks and groans. Some other stuff went on too. One day, my mom was in the downstairs bathroom when she heard a man's cough coming from outside the door. Thinking it was my dad going into the study room, which was opposite the bathroom, she thought nothing of it. When she came out of the bathroom, however, the study was empty and no one was outside. She went back to the kitchen and found my dad where she'd left him, sitting at the table. She asked him if he had come out the bathroom and coughed. He hadn't moved the whole time. Another time, my mom, my dad, and one of their friends were sitting at the kitchen table when they all heard a massive crash come directly from upstairs where my bedroom was. My mom described it as the sound of a wardrobe falling over or a full-grown male adult being thrown to the floor. They rushed upstairs to find me fast asleep and nothing out of place in my room. We even had the fireplace in my room checked in case a stone had fallen down the chimney. Nothing was found and there was no explanation. Everyone in the house was accounted for. One night my parents were in bed when they heard the sound of a woman gently humming and singing. The sound came from the end of the corridor and continued downstairs, then eventually stopped. Again, this could not be explained. Myself and my sister were asleep, and even if we did get up, we certainly would have walked down the corridor singing. My second story is based in my grandmother's house, a manor house which is around 200 years old. My grandmother has a story which even to this day she swears was true. She was walking upstairs when in front of her she saw a pair of women's shoes on the step above. She looked up to see a skirt, blouse, and before she could see the woman's face, she vanished. My dad's family all grew up in the house, and my uncle mentioned that from his bedroom, he used to hear the sound of gravel crunching outside, like someone walking towards the house. On several occasions, he even recounts seeing two big black dogs sitting by his bed. Although I like the house, I always get that feeling of being watched whenever I go over. If I'm sat in the kitchen, I always want to look into the parlor, which is next in the kitchen, with the door always open so you can see in, and I always feel like someone's sitting in there. Even to this day, I refuse to go upstairs by myself, as well as seeing a key moving in a locked door. From the inside, when no one was in there, myself and my sister had a weird experience. We were sat outside. The garden is kind of placed on a hill, very sloped, that you could reach by climbing some steps. From where we were sitting, we could just see into my grandmother's bedroom. She had gone out shopping and had left her two dogs on her bed. We were just watching them, talking, when suddenly, one of the dogs started barking at the corner of the room at something we couldn't see. She, the dog, then jumped onto the bed and started barking directly at us. Then, at the exact same time, we both saw a white mist, sort of in the form of a hand, move gently over the dog's head. He then stopped barking. My sister and I both looked at each other in surprise. We'd both seen it, but could not understand it. It was daylight, but not sunny, quite cloudyless. There was no reflections on the glass or anything like that, because there was nothing to reflect, no trees or anything behind us, and we quite clearly seen the mist from the inside of the window. While serving at RAF, Middle and Hall, with USAF, 1993-1994, I lived with a roommate from Santa Rosa named Greg. Santa Rosa is located in New Mexico. We both originally lived in the dorms on base, but got special permission from our first sergeants to move off base together. This was due to the fact that we did not drink alcohol, and drunken parties were a constant among our roommates, and in the dorms, in general, 24 hours daily as airmen worked 3 shifts. We were both practical-minded Air Force aircraft mechanics with serious responsibilities and not given to flights of fancy, and had no previous interest or experience in the paranormal or occult. I simultaneously dated an Englishman I would later marry named Bill. The cottage only had a coal fireplace for heating. Greg did all he could to keep the coal stoked, but the house never warmed, and coal always died out quickly, despite large piles of coal Greg stoked well often. The phone rang at various hours day and night, with a loud, hissing static. There was a faint, but unmistakable sound of someone whispering loudly through the static, but the words were always unintelligible. Calls to the operator to discover where the calls came from were answered that we had not received any phone calls at all during these events as far as the phone company was concerned. The calls simply came from nowhere. Greg worked a night shift, I worked days. Every night, I heard heavy footsteps come up the stairs to the bedroom landing, 4 square feet, and back downstairs after varying lengths of pause. When I was home at night, these heavy footsteps occasionally went into Greg's room. When he was at home, He heard the steps enter my room a few times. 500-year-old stairs creaked very loudly beneath thin carpet when no known humans were using them. The human footsteps could be heard anywhere in the cottage. These phantom footsteps were much louder and projected a foreboding emotion to the roommate at home when they occurred. The rocking chair in the living room near the fireplace rocked off of its own accord on a regular basis. Once, Greg and I were simultaneously TDY, or assigned temporary duty, to separate bases for a few months. We locked the cottage down tight as a drum. A friend agreed to check the place from time to time, but as all doors and windows remained locked, he never went inside. I returned before Craig did. Every object in the kitchen that could be moved, such as cutlery, dishes, pots and pans, bread bins, knickknacks, whatever, were taken by someone and all dumped in the middle of the living room floor. Nothing was missing. It was simply transported to the middle of the living room and unceremoniously dumped there. At other times I was TDY, and Greg experienced occurrences more often and more intensely for him when I was gone. However, his worst experience happened unbeknownst to me while I was deep inside the cottage. One night, as Greg went out to his car to go on duty, he saw what are sometimes called a shadow figure, but in much more detail. Greg was not bothered by the unmistakable occurrences in the cottage until he met this thing. It was blacker than black, the outline of a large adult male, about 6.5 feet tall, be his estimation. No facial or other features, except glowing eyes that looked at Greg in such an evil way. Greg said he was scared to death. He claimed without hearing a sound that this thing was unmistakably evil and had ill intentions, to say the least. Greg got in his car, a true British yellow Mini, and sped away as soon as he could. There is a broken down shed directly behind the house in the backyard. Both Greg and I looked into it from time to time, but refused to enter until one day we agreed to go in together. We both experienced an unexplainable strong sense of being watched from up close, though no one else was on the property. The sensation, we both agreed at the time, was an evil one. We both thought we heard heavy breathing, but neither one of us wanted to jump to the conclusion and appeared to the other one to be easily duped by what we couldn't explain. There's a storage area on the side of the house that cannot be accessed from inside the house, only by the door outside the storage area, attached to the side of the cottage. Greg and I both hardly dared to look inside after our first time inspecting the property. There were no electrical lights in the room. There was junk and building materials scattered around, as if someone dumped everything from the ceiling, and materials changed positions from time to time. Occasionally, the taps, faucets in the bathrooms upstairs turned on and off on its own accord, yet both hot and cold tap levers were always in the off position. Every unexplained occurrence was of an extremely strongly sensed nature. It always got our attention, except for the static phone calls and the chair rocking itself. Most activity took place when there was only one roommate in the cottage. Neither Greg nor I had ever experienced anything paranormal before. At least, he had not anything to this degree. Of the photos taken inside and outside the cottage, there is nothing remarkable. No orbs, light streaks, vortices, apparitions, etc. The Englishman I was dating and later married was a complete skeptic, but strongly disliked being in this cottage. He would only state something is wrong with this house, something is strange about it. For his degree of skepticism, That was quite a statement in itself. When a man with a young teenage girl moved into the other side of this duplex cottage, Greg and I decided to warn her, without giving anything specific away about the occurrences, so we weren't planting suggestions in her mind, knowing teenagers are very impressionable. We simply welcomed her, made chit-chat, then told her when she was alone if she was ever uncomfortable or frightened, telling us she was in her bedroom alone when she audibly heard a voice call out for her. She had no history of hallucinations, swore she did not mistake it for a conversation she heard through the walls, which would not have occurred for that night Greg was on duty at the base, and that the voice was male, not matching Greg or myself. Shortly after this, I moved in with my fiance in a nearby town, largely to get away from the occurrences, and soon lost touch with Greg entirely. The paranormal occurrences in the cottage were constant, in one form or another, and experienced intensely. It carried a heavy pull of fear or, at times, dread or terror everywhere in that cottage that never ever left. Never anything that could be called benign or benevolent. In the summer of 1996, I bought a large home in a nice, older neighborhood. My fiancée lived with her parents at the time she was still in college, and I was living with my parents since I'd just gotten out of the army. We were really looking forward to getting married and having our own private place. The first night in the house felt very strange to me, but I chalked it up to being a newlywed in a new home. As time went by, the strange feelings did not abate as they thought it would. I felt more and more apprehensive, especially when I was in the house alone. The house made very strange noises when I was there by myself that it didn't make while Sandy was home with me. Also, I asked Sandy if she heard any strange noises when she was there alone, and she said she didn't. I tried to ignore the noises in apprehension, but it was getting harder and harder from the upstairs. There were just the two of us in the house, and the bedrooms upstairs were only used for storage. The footsteps seemed to pace back and forth in the upstairs hallway. Sandy claimed she never heard any of the sounds and was calling me paranoid and crazy. At first, the footsteps were confined to the upstairs, but eventually they came downstairs and into our bedroom. Whatever was making the footstep noise would come up to my side of our bed and stand there for several minutes before walking straight out of her room. I heard other strange noises in the house, like the sound of an animal growling and scratching noises in the walls. Someone or something knocked on our front door one morning at 3 a.m. so loud that I thought the door was going to come off the hinges. Of course, Sandy never heard anything and accused me of trying to scare her. I began to see small, black humanoid figures darting in and out of the corner of my vision. They would shoot behind furniture or duck into some rooms when I tried to lay my eyes directly on them. I saw them during the night and day, and began to see them more often and often. I would often get this odd feeling that someone was behind me, and if I quickly turned around, I could see one or more of those things run away. One day, when I turned around to try and see the little black things, I saw a large, black thing at the other end of the hallway. It was about 6 feet tall, and though I could not make out any features, I could tell that it was a human shape under a cloak, and it did not run away. It just stood there for several seconds to let me get a good look at it, and then it slowly disappeared. I saw that apparition several more times over the next few months, always standing some distance away and just looking at me. I was really getting scared, and it came to the point that I did not want to go home at night. The experiences were taking a huge toll on our marriage. Sandy would blame me for scaring her with reports of things that were not happening in her mind, just to cause trouble in our marriage. She would not begin to convince that I was truly scared and that something was really happening, even if she did not experience it. We stayed married for a total of 30 months before she moved out of the house and filed for divorce. But here's where the story gets even stranger. The day she moved out of the house, the frequency and intensity of the experiences began to diminish. That night, the footsteps did not come downstairs like they always had in the past. I saw the large black apparition only one time after she moved out, and that time it was translucent, as opposed to being completely opaque as it had been before. It also did not stick around as before. Once I saw it, it vanished. 4 months after she was gone, all the activity ceased. The house was quiet and still, and I no longer felt that apprehension I wrote about earlier. I've since remarried, and we live in the same house with our children. I thought that the experiences might return once I brought my new wife into the home, but they didn't. If they had, I would have sold the place. It had to be something associated with Sandy. Maybe she was into the occult or something. I spent plenty of nights with her in her parents' home when they were away, before we were married, and never experienced anything like what happened in the house. Perhaps it was the combination of her and the house that was the problem, but I hope not. If it were, then that means the same thing could happen again, and I don't want my family subjected to that. I'm writing to tell you my story. I was reading Dave's story, and it's so close to the experience that I had that it actually gave me chills. My first paranormal experience happened to me when I was 4 years old. All the experts say that things that happen to someone before the age of 5 is very hard to remember. The funny thing is that I can remember my experience like it was yesterday. My mother, sister, who was 3 years younger than me, and myself. I remember being asleep in my bed and waking up very suddenly. I looked at the doorway and I saw this full-bodied figure. The only thing is that it was completely white. I'm not talking like white, like a white wall. I'm talking white like energy. This figure to me was a child. The reason I believe this is actually because of its height. I mean, it did not have a face or anything like that. It walked towards me and got on my bed. I remember pulling the blanket up over my head because I was so scared, but I actually felt it on the bed. At that point, I ran screaming and crying into my mom's room. Her boyfriend got up and walked me back to bed to show me there was nothing to be scared of. When we got there, it was gone. Now let's fast forward to the age of 17. By this time in my life, my mom had gotten married, not the same guy from when I was 4, and they had bought a house. It was a tri-level, with a full finished basement and a sub-basement. From day one, something felt very odd in the house, almost like a very heavy, unwelcome feeling. The sub-basement was probably the strangest. When you would walk in there, you could see spray paint all over the walls. I know that's not strange, but when you stood in the center of the room, you could see that the spray paint was actually covering up what looked like writing on the walls, and it was also on the floor, so that was kinda creepy. We had 2 dogs that both refused to go into my room and constantly would either stare at the wall and bark, or would stand at the stairs and bark up to the 2nd floor or down the stairs to the basement. The longer I lived in the house, the more I began to feel almost alone. It was like I was becoming isolated mentally from everything. In my room, it would constantly feel as though I was being watched. I would hear loud bangs and things sounding like they were hitting the floor, but nothing would be around. All the motion sensor lights around the outside of the house would turn on all at once for no reason. I actually began to think I was going crazy. Finally, I broke down and told my stepdad everything that had been going on. He looked at me very seriously. I remember thinking, oh crap, he thinks I'm nuts. He began to tell me about how one night, after I'd gotten home from work, he worked second shift and didn't get home till around 1 a.m. We were sitting on the computer playing a game. At the time, our computer was in the front room, and you could see right up to the stairs and onto the landing where the bedrooms were. He said he saw a man walk out of my room. The man he saw was a taller man in a pair of jeans and a flannel shirt. At first, he thought it was me because he only saw the man out of the corner of his eye. But then he asked how I was doing and looked up and realized the man wasn't me. The man turned and walked back into my room. My stepdad ran up the stairs and opened my door, and I was the only one in there, and I was asleep in a pair of boxers. After my stepdad told me this, I was convinced something was going on. One weekend, while my parents were out of town, I invited 2 of my friends over so we could try to catch stuff on film. Of course, we got absolutely nothing. That is, until we tried to go to sleep. We had all decided to sleep in the basement because there was more room there. We turned off the lights and started to go to sleep. My one friend, Chris, was already asleep, and myself and Dave were talking. All of a sudden, the light to the sub-basement turned on, and we could see what looked like a shadow under the door. You could actually hear what sounded like the work boots walking up the wooden stairs. We woke up Chris, and we all stood at the door. We really thought someone had broken into the house. We opened up the door, prepared to beat the crap out of someone, and there was no one there. We walked downstairs and looked around. We checked the windows and everything. The windows were shut and looked like no one was there. There are a lot of things that happened, but it would be like writing a novel to tell them all. I just thought it was kind of creepy how similar my story is to Dave's. This experience happened when I was in my late 20s, back around late 1994 or early 95. I was laying in bed asleep. I felt something touch my face, and I woke up. I was face to face with a smiling old man. He crawled backwards out of my bed and stood there smiling at me. He looked like he was Caucasian descent, in his 80s at least. He had a glowing light all around him. He looked like he was at peace while staring at me. I have no idea who this was. Furthermore, I don't know why I wasn't afraid of him. He definitely looked scary to me, and I had roommates at the time. I don't know why I didn't go running down the hallway to get someone. I just stayed in bed and stared at him. Again, I wasn't afraid at all. It was almost peaceful. He faded away, and I looked at the clock in front of me. It was 3 a.m. in the morning. I stayed up a little while, and then went back to sleep. How do you talk about something like this? I didn't tell any of my roommates when it happened. I was fearful because I thought I would be outed as a crazy person. I did call my best friend, and thankfully she seemed to believe me. I gave her my rocking chair, and she wanted to make sure the spirit was not standing next to it. So yes, I think she believed me. I've thought about it a lot over the years, trying to figure out who this could have been. I told my grandmother. She's Catholic and thinks it was an angel. I've never met my father, and I have no pictures of him, so I don't know what he looked like. But perhaps, maybe this could have been my father? My mother is Spanish and French, and supposedly, my father was of Caucasian descent like the spirit of the old man. So again, maybe it was the father or grandfather that I never met. Who knows? Since then, I've now had a husband and children. I mentioned it once to my husband. He looked at me like I was crazy, and I'm not allowed to talk about it again. Anyway, thank you for reading my story. I know it sounds unbelievable, but it's the best I can do to tell you guys. These are two experiences that happened to me about 5 years ago. Here's the first story. My house is 6 years old and has never been lived in by anyone else. This started about 2 months ago. I'm laying in my bed alone, with the door to the hall and the door to the bathroom open. I swear I see the door open a little bit and then go back to where it was. I then see black figures with little or no shape appear in the doorway. Then whoosh, they are gone. I also saw what looked like people I knew, who will stick their heads in the door and then turn and leave. Last night I was asleep when I felt something nudge me 2 times. I woke up to see this black form standing beside me. It stood there for about 2 seconds, then vanished out the door. The most interesting aspect of this all is that these figures have no legs. They are just a black oval shape with no faces or arms. Just a black form. Last night was the first time it really scared me. I felt like it was the Grim Reaper asking me to follow him. Now on to my next experience, which was even spookier, I might add. I was working in a gym at a hotel in Moodsburn near Glasgow. One night, I was getting ready to leave for the night. The route I had to take was down a dark corridor to the main door. This was a walk I had made many times before, and had never any problems. But this night, as I was going along, I felt like I was being watched. As I got to the end of the corridor, I turned to close the door when I saw what looked like a white shape running towards me. Needless to say, I closed and locked the door very quickly and sprinted to the bus stop outside the hotel. The next night, I was working again and decided to see what could have caused it. I went through every possibility I could think of, from car headlights to interior lights, but nothing recreated what I had seen. About 2 days later, I was looking through the old accident book when I found an entry from 3 years before. A man was running on the treadmill and died of a heart attack whilst using it. What was interesting was, it was the same date and time of when I saw this incident myself, of the running man. This happened to a friend and I back in the mid-1960s, when we were 12 or 13 years of age each, and we were camping with our church group, and while we had some free time, Alan and me as in Mark, decided to do exploring on our own, so we set off towards the perimeter of the park, where we found a fence that we could easily squeeze through, surrounding the park property. And bordering some large open cow pasture land was a grove of trees right smack in the middle of it. We set off across the pasture land towards the grove of trees, and much to our delight, for it was a hot day, we found a meandering stream in the grove of trees that was about 6 feet deep and about 6 feet wide, and it wandered all throughout the grove. But to our dismay, Alan and I realized that we were wearing blue jean pants and a t-shirt and had not brought along our swimsuits, since we were not planning on going swimming until later, when the springs in the park was less crowded, so we had nothing to wear to go swimming at that time. But Alan convinced me that there was nobody around to see us, and we could go swimming like they used to do in the old days, by going swimming in the nude or skinny dipping, and nobody could tell we had nothing on. Once we were in the water, and not wanting to be labeled a coward or chicken by my friend, I quickly got undressed, and we dove into the cool water. We swam around in the water for about 15 minutes, when we were startled to see a young boy, about our age, dressed in some dusty old-fashioned looking overalls, and barefoot, staring at Alan and me from the bushes. And even though he probably saw we were both skinny dipping by our clothes hanging from the bushes, neither Alan or me felt embarrassed about it. After all of us were boys, and Alan got bold, but staying in the water, Alan said hi to him. The boy came out of the bushes, but didn't get near the banks, and he just stared at Alan and me for a solid 20 seconds. All we could think to do was ask him if he wanted to go swimming with us, but at this point, I don't think we realized it was a ghost at the moment. We just always thought it was a kid that always hung around this area, and just wanted to play because we were playing around. But then, it was like he had simply vanished again. Alan and I did not wear glasses, and our vision was perfect, and we were looking straight at the boy as we climbed out of the stream, and like I said, the boy just disappeared before our very eyes, just kinda blinked out of sight, and Alan and I quickly got into our jeans and looked around for him, but he was nowhere to be found in the bushes. And if he wanted to play with us, why did he disappear? And if he had left the grove of trees, which he didn't, we would have seen him in the open pasture land. And afterwards, we talked about our experience between us, but Alan and I didn't tell anyone of this, knowing that no one would ever believe us. Alan and I both wondered if the boy might have fallen into the stream from the crumbling banks and drowned in that stream many years ago. And as the kids our age wouldn't be caught dead wearing old-fashioned looking overalls, when all the kids we knew were wearing the latest looking fashions, was it even remotely possible that perhaps Alan and me saw a ghost that day? One who was lonely and just wanted to play. I worked at a place called Dowling as a janitor for a year. My shift was overnight, and for 3 months, I worked that shift alone. I never saw a purple orb, but I did spend a lot of time outside. What I can tell you is that after the creepiness of being in a big building all alone wears off, there are still sounds and such that can't be explained by me. Every week, if not every night, doors would open and close by themselves. Me and the others would go chasing these noises, thinking there was someone in the building, but of course, there was no one there, or I wouldn't be writing to you. And the security company wouldn't call to say an external alarm went off, so there couldn't have been anyone there. Sometimes we'd be in the library, and we'd hear one of the counselor's doors open and close. The library was the same room, but divided by office walls from the counselor area. Sometimes the classroom doors would as well. At times, I'd be in the gym and would chase the sound of footsteps. The place does make a lot of building noises. It's difficult to report on anything I heard in the auditorium, the creepiest place in the school. Because the roof and heating systems would collaborate, with a big empty space to make many mysterious noises that could be too easy to explain away. Plus, the auditorium was creepy because it was always dark until I would clean it, and there were so many access areas, such as backstage or the lighting area above the stage, and the several doors that would really just make me paranoid. Having said all that, I did sometimes get transfixed on the idea that an emaciated naked woman was watching me. I only got that feeling in or around that particular room. It makes no sense to me, but I did avoid it. The band room was also a little creepy. I would sometimes take my lunch there so I could listen to the radio, and the doors within would make noises like they were opening and shutting. There was one definitive time that I also couldn't explain. I went into the library and locked the door behind me because I was hearing so many noises around that door that night. Then, I climbed over the wall to the counselor's area and unlocked that door so I could rush through it when I heard the noise. Sure enough, the library door tried to open because I heard the deadbolt hit the door frame. So I ran to the hall and listened for footsteps, but there were none. I ran to look down both north and south halls along the library. There was nobody, and there was nowhere to hide. I didn't think someone could have gotten away like that, not in that manner anyway, without making enough noise for me to hear it. A similar thing happened one night when all three of the overnight janitors were in there. We heard the noises in the counselor's area, so I climbed the wall while the other guys went to the doors, but nobody was there. I want to assure you of two things, even though these aren't really the most impressive tales. First, I don't really believe in ghosts. I'm open enough to the idea, I guess, but anytime I heard a noise, I would go looking for somebody because I assumed it was an intruder. There were times we had intruders, and times people who had rights to the building were found. However, there were so many times that we were sure there were noises, and so little chance for whoever was making them to escape, and we still found nothing, that I thought you might be interested to hear the story of Dowling from someone who was there for a long time. The building stopped creeping me out by itself about a week after I was working there alone. I heard voices and chased them, but the air unit, the building setting, and other normal noises stopped giving me the jitters by the time they became normal for me. I don't really believe in ghosts, but I saw the purple orb listed on the website after a night of chasing these noises, so I decided to write this to you, albeit 2 years after the fact. Last thing I want to say, there are 2 creepy stories about the place from a source that I'm not sure I trust, but I'll tell you anyway. One time, this guy saw people in robes walking into the woods west of the building. Another time, a girl was taken advantage of in the auditorium. A funny, unbelievable, but true story from the overnight shift. Ninjas attacked the school one night and put one of the soccer goals in the atrium. The kids did this for their overnight prank. They seriously climbed onto the roof of the school with 2 of the school's regulation-sized soccer goals and dumped them into the atrium. I chased off a bunch of kids when they were trying to get on the roof a 3rd time. They were all dressed like ninjas. My name is Carly, and I used to live in a 100-year-old house on the Eastern Shore in Maryland. This house was on a street with about 10 other houses, all closely related in shape and size, except my friend's. She's my best friend, and the man who had built all the houses in our street lived in hers. They have never had any bad experiences in theirs, up until now. My friend's older sister came back for Thanksgiving, and she woke up in the middle of the night and saw a form of a giant man. The man closely resembled Andre the Giant, even though She thought it was her boyfriend, but when she looked next to her, he was sleeping. She really didn't think too much more about it until the next day, where the rest of the family shared that they had been hearing and seeing things too. My house was only a few years younger than hers. My parents bought it at an auction because the whole thing had to be gutted and renewed. As my dad was working on it, he was putting in new windows one day and saw a man. He was crouched down with his face right up against the wall, looking at the window he had just put in. The man saw my dad get up and disappeared. I've had my own experiences too. Like, we used to hear someone running up and down the halls at night. My room was right at the end, and my bed looked out the door. When the person got to the end, you could hear them turn around and run back. That wasn't too bad though. I also remember going into my room and saw a crowd of people. They were all dark figures with the outline of a trench coat that were so long you couldn't see their feet. They slowly faded away, and I didn't go back in the room for weeks. I would stay in the other guest's bedroom. I had a great aunt, and she was a psychic. I loved her. We had the strongest bond you could ever have with anyone. She died of cancer, and it was terribly hard on me. I ended up with some things of hers, like her tarot cards, but most importantly, her angel cards. I'd just gotten these, and I was up in my room playing with them when I pulled up one card that had a picture of a lady on it. This lady looked exactly like my aunt, and she was surrounded by animals. My aunt had a basement full of bunnies, birds, fish. She had 5 cats and 5 dogs. The message on the card said, "A message from your loved one. I'm fine, very happy now. Don't worry about me, and don't forget about me, but don't let me overtake your life." Then it said goodbye, and I love you on it too. After I read that, I teared up and ran downstairs. I showed my mom, and she couldn't even believe it. I couldn't believe it either, so I got scared and told my mom to take the cards out of my room, just in case. My mom put it on her dresser. They were there for about a week or two, and then they disappeared. My mom never moved them, and neither did anybody else. No one had touched them, and they had just vanished. I'm for sure that was her final message to me. Maybe not forever, but just so I wouldn't worry. It was her proper goodbye. The week before Thanksgiving, my son and I were emptying out a house that was to be torn down and this new one brought in. We were standing by my pickup truck, which we were loading, and he happened to look at a bright light in the sky and said, "Hey, look at that. Is it a plane?" I looked up, and there were no flashing lights. Just looked like a wide set of headlights, no other colored lights. I thought at first it was a plane, but no sound for as low as it seemed. It came over slow and headed east, and I thought it would disappear, like over the trees, like the planes that come over do. But instead, it went up, and did so very quickly, until it was a speck that disappeared. I still wonder what it was. Was it a paranormal entity, like an orb or some sort? But maybe something different, like even a UFO. It's hard to say. But back in 1990, my husband and I were talking outside, and happened to look at the edge of our 40 acres. There, just above the trees, was a long cigar-shaped object that covered the entire line of the 40-acre parcel. It had flashing lights and looked like windows were along the side of it. It was reported in the newspaper, as a lot of people saw it that same night. It made no sound at all. My son passed away in August 2008, and I've had my grandson say that he sees him in my bathroom, find that strange. Last week he came to me and his mother and said that there was a man in my bathroom and he needed to put his clothes on. When I found my son, he was naked. My grandson didn't see him that way, the way he passed away. He has told me many times that there are ghosts in my house. We have heard doors open and close, and sometimes the floor's creaking. Like last fall, I'd gone in my bathroom to turn off the lights the kids left on. I called out to him, thinking that maybe someone was still in the bathroom. Finally, I said loudly and impatiently, "Who is in here?" I heard a voice distinctly said, "I am," very quietly and clear. I didn't recognize the voice and thought one of the kids were playing a joke on me. No one was near the bathroom, which is just off my master bedroom. It didn't scare me. There are other strange things that happen in my house. We hear little kids outside talking. Most of the time, it is indirect, and you can't make out what they say, and other times, something comes in clear. We just think the land is haunted. These incidents happened around 1984 or 1985 in Baltimore, Maryland. I was in my early 20s and on my way to meet a shuttle bus that would take me to my job in Washington, D.C. It was around 1 p.m. in the afternoon. I was driving down Windsor Mill Road, going towards Woodland, Maryland. As you drive down that hilly road, it kind of feels creepy because you pass an old graveyard that sits across the street from a small patch of old, single-family homes. As I drove, I looked over at one house in particular, and I saw a young girl. She appeared to be about 10 years of age. She was extremely pale, and her hair was long and bright red. She was alone, sitting on the steps. What really stood out, though, was the way she was dressed. She wore a long old-fashioned dress and black granny-style boots that buttoned up. The clothes looked like something people would have worn in the 1800s. She just kind of sat there, with no expression on her face, staring across the street at the graveyard. I was really puzzled seeing her. First, because of the clothes she was wearing, and second, because it was extremely hot that day. We were experiencing a heat wave. It was at least 85 to 90 degrees. I figured she was just a kid playing dress up, and maybe her parents weren't aware that she was outside in the oppressive heat, dressed in those heavy clothes. I went on to work and didn't think any more about it. I took the same route every day and didn't see her again until about 3 to 4 months later. I was driving down that same road, and when I came upon that house, I noticed a group of kids in front of the house playing a very lively game of tag, laughing and chasing each other. I looked closely, and there was the redhead girl running along as if she were playing with them. I say as if, because it seemed like the other kids were not playing with her. It looked like they didn't know she was even there. There was no direct interaction between her and the other kids. The kids would run one way, and she would run too, but not with them. She looked like she was playing by herself. I can't explain it any other way. It was just weird. She wore the same old-fashioned clothes that she had on the first time I saw her. I honestly thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. A year passed. I changed jobs and forgot about the sightings until one day I was having a discussion about the paranormal with my mother. She was born in the South and had experienced her fair share of paranormal sightings. I began to tell her about my sighting, and she quickly interrupted me and described what the girl looked like and what she was wearing. She told me that she had seen the girl before and assured me that my eyes were not playing tricks on me. That is because I had indeed seen a ghost. I've driven down that road several times since then, but I've never seen the red-haired girl again. I've spent most of my life growing up in Hartsdale, New York, a block away from the Ferncliff Cemetery, directly behind the old cemetery flower shop. When I was younger, and our family first moved into the house, my mother would yell at my father, blaming him for leaving the door to the basement open, claiming that my sister and I could easily fall down the stairs and hurt ourselves. My father would always deny it was him who was opening the door. It couldn't have been my sister and I, because the bolt to keep the door closed was too high for us to reach at that age. My father wanted to test if it could be someone else. My mother, my father, sister, and I all went into the guest room to watch a movie one night, around the times of the door constantly being opened. Before the movie started, my father went downstairs to check and make sure the door was closed and the bolt was locked. Halfway through the movie, he went downstairs and realized that the bolt was undone and the door was wide open. My mother had to have priests come over one day and do whatever it is they do when there are signs of a ghost in a house. Clearly, it didn't work. Or maybe there's different spirits because that instance isn't the only time. One day, around the time we were about to remodel the kitchen, I walked into the house and my mother was looking at me like she'd seen a ghost. That's because she actually saw this white form of a little girl running up the stairs and into my bedroom. Often, I've come home and heard voices or whispers. I would yell out that I'm home to inform whoever, thinking my mother or someone else was home, that I'd come back from school. I would then go around the house and realize no one was there. At first, I would think there were thieves who broke in and hid. Eventually, I realized this was a common occurrence and did not want to be home alone by myself because of this. My mother has heard voices too. When I moved away for a while to live in New Jersey, I would get frantic phone calls for my mother to come home to visit her because she would constantly hear voices and objects would move on their own. One night, the most terrified I ever heard my mother. She said she did not get any sleep because she kept hearing things, objects moving about, and then the wireless doorbell she had recently installed went off at around 2 or 3 a.m. She went as far as to take the batteries out, but the bell continued ringing for a good half an hour or so. I believe she said her bed was shaking too before any of this happened. Books had flown off the shelves and across the room in my sister's bedroom. This has happened on several occasions. I also recall as a child my toys moving on their own and me just telling myself that it was all my imagination because I couldn't believe what I was seeing, resulting in me just hiding under my covers until sunrise. Finally, I know this is probably just a weird coincidence, but the day my old refrigerator died was ironically the same day the elderly grandmother of the previous owners died. She was very fond of that old fridge and was very upset that the family didn't take it with them to the next house they moved off to. I just considered it an odd occurrence, but whatever. The dang thing was as old as time, so I was surprised it even lasted as long as it did. Oh, and while we're on the subject of the paranormal, the Ferncliff Cemetery. Never had a problem with it until one night I was walking through. My friends and I would always cut through the cemetery to get to one another's houses, because it was safer than walking on the main and busy streets. Usually, we would go in packs, or if alone, during the daytime. I don't anymore because, well, besides the fact I can drive now, one night, when the moon was full and you could clearly see that no one was around, except for the field of graves, I constantly heard voices whispering. I would constantly look around, thinking maybe it was some teenagers drinking. That's what kids used to do in town, drink in the cemetery, but no one was anywhere in sight. I know my house in this town and area near the cemetery is not the only one that has or is still being haunted. On the other side of the cemetery, in White Plains, there is another house near where my mom's friend lives. The mother thought the son was making up an imaginary friend that he would talk to, until one day she saw for herself an apparition of an elderly man. He rose up from the ground of the room she has her washer and dryer in, and then he vanished. My name's Patrick, and I submitted a story to the site about 5 or 6 years ago of some things that happened to me back when I was in college, but I wanted to submit a more recent story of mine as well. About 3 years ago, I purchased the house I live in now, which is a 1940s Cape Cod in a suburb of Pittsburgh. The land upon which my neighborhood sits is the site of the post-revolutionary military installation known as Legionville, which is where General Mad Anthony Wayne trained the first peacetime U.S. Army. The first night I slept in my house, I woke up about 3 or 4 a.m. with the light next to my bed turned on. Now, I'm a light sleeper and need total dark to fall asleep. I figured I must have turned the light on in my sleep, so I turned it off and went back to sleep. The next night, I woke up again at 3 or 4 a.m. and the same light was turned on. I was a little weirded out with this occurrence, but shut the light off and went back to sleep. The next night I made sure I was going to sleep with the light off, moved the light all the way to the other side of the nightstand, and slept all the way on the opposite side of my queen-size bed. Sure enough, at 3 or 4 a.m., I woke up and the light was on. What weirded me out more than the experiences of waking up with the light on is the fact that it completely stopped after I confronted it. Fast forward about 3 months. I have a career which allows me to work from my office at home for much of the time. I was in the second bedroom, which I converted to my office, doing some paperwork around 3 p.m. I heard a door downstairs open and could sense that someone was in the house. I figured it was my parents, who have a habit of letting themselves in on unannounced visits. I called down, "I'm up here," to them, but received no response. I went to the top of the steps and yelled down, "Hello," and nobody answered. At that point, I heard the door to my kitchen slam shut, and loud, heavy footsteps run down into my basement. I ran outside of the house and called the police, as I was certain there was an intruder. From the sidewalk across the street, I observed the house while waiting for the cops to arrive. I have a front door, a garage door, and a side door, all of which are visible from the street. Nobody exited the house during this time. 2 police officers showed up and seared my house, but found nobody. The strangest part of this occurrence is that the door I heard slam, which is at the top of my basement steps in my kitchen, was locked. That door locks with a deadbolt. It is the type where you cannot lock it behind you and shut the door. You have to either lock it from the kitchen side or with a key on the basement steps side. I clearly heard the door slam shut and then steps ran down to the basement, but the door was locked from the kitchen side. At that point, I decided to have a priest do a house blessing. For the next few months, nothing that degree would happen. However, I would be in bed late at night, just at the point where I'm about to doze off, and would hear a male and female talking. It's just like when you were a kid and were sent to bed when the adults are still up talking downstairs. I could hear voices back and forth, but could not make out what they were saying. I'd get up out of bed to listen closer, but the voices would stop. I made sure to check to see if I was catching the neighbors talking or left a TV or radio on, but never found an explanation. After those few months, all activity stopped altogether. I never really did figure things out, but as long as it stays quiet, I'm happy. I've had an encounter with an invisible thing, such as what was posted in the first Lowing, Texas post. It was on my great uncle's farms, Uncle Nut. Have no idea why they called him that, out near Elgin, Texas. We were visiting, and I got bored of the grown-up talk, so I went out past the barn, and their dog went with me. We went out about 50 yards from the back of the barn, and we were looking for bugs and such. The dog was fine, I was fine, and all was good. The fields and woods we were in had short grass, and all the trees looked about the same age, and the trunks were maybe a foot around each. The trees were spaced roughly about 10 to 20 feet apart, or more, and you could easily see through and past them without any problems. More trees were behind them about the same distance, but there would be no way a person could move from behind one tree to another without being seen. The dog was fine, I was fine, and all was good. Well, pretty soon, all that changed. I started feeling like something big was up ahead of me in the dark, maybe 100 feet or more. I looked, nothing in sight. Shake it off. Keep bug hunting. Nope. Something is there. Can't see it, but something is there. Then, a loud grunt-like noise from ahead of us sounded deep like a bull or buffalo. Still can't see anything, but the hair's standing up on my neck. I move my position to get a better view, and as I do, the dog moves closer to me and let out a low growl, which is answered by another loud grunt, but slowly closer. Now I can hear grass and leaves being crunched, and can definitely tell where the sound is coming from, but still nothing but trees and grass ahead of us. Those trees can't hide a bull and buffalo, and as I look forward, I see some of the grass moving, but there isn't any wind. It's like I'm in a vacuum. I look down at the dog, he looks at me, and whatever is ahead of us comes closer. This time, not a step, but a faster pace. I'm still looking at the dog, and he at me. We hear a gurgly, ugly-sounding grunt, and whatever it is coming on strong at a good speed. I look up and see Bart get knocked off the side of a tree, and decide I've had enough. I look down to the dog who is already hauling you-know-what back to the barn. I took off, and actually got to the barn before the dog did. Neither one of us stopped at the barn, as we both headed straight to the house. Whatever that was in those woods was chasing after us, snorting and stomping as I was running after us. I've been chased by a bull before, and vividly remember the sounds associated with that experience, but stopped before it got to the barn. At least I think so. But it still sounded like a bulldozer crashing around out there when I turned back towards the field and woods once I got to the house. It was something. I went in and told my great uncle about what happened, and he got all worried and said, "Oh, we don't go out there," and that's all he said. I later looked, and on the back of the barn was painted this weird symbol, like a pair of glasses, like an infinity sign, but with some other marks as well. Nope, I didn't go out to the field again and press my luck, and the dog spent the rest of my stay under the old house. Hi, my name is Lee, and I'd like to share my recent haunting experiences with you all. I'm Australian, recently moved to Ireland, and during my first week here, I was staying at the Dublin International Hostel. I was staying in a dorm room with 9 other women. However, one night, I woke up in the middle of the night, sitting bolt upright. I didn't have any trace of sleepiness, and after looking around for a few seconds, I heard someone whisper Ella in my ear, clear as day. I thought it might have been one of the other women, but looking around, I saw that everyone else was asleep. The next day I asked at the front desk about the history of the hostel, and apparently it used to be an orphanage, go figure right, and a school for the local area, and the good folks at the front desk told me there has been a fair share of people reported spooky things. Next, I arrived at my new house, new job working as a nanny. I got to know the children and got to know the story of the family. The father's parents had passed away before the children were born. One day, I came into the room to find the oldest daughter, who is 4, talking away to herself. I asked her what she was doing. She said that she was talking to Granny Teresa at the window. I asked her if she was there right now, and she said that she was gone now, but Granny Teresa knows all about you. You're staying in her room. I got the chills like you wouldn't believe. The parents told me that she often says she's talking to her Granny Teresa. Another time, it was just myself and the baby, she's 2, in the house, and we were just playing away when she stood up, went to the staircase and said, "Hello? Hello?" with a big smile on her face. I asked her who she was talking to, and she just pointed to the top of the staircase and started chattering away in baby to the person at the top of the stairs. At other times, I've heard footsteps on the upper floor when it's just me in the house on the bottom floor, and sometimes in the room I sleep in, it gets unbearably cold. I wonder, who was Ella? Has anyone else stayed at the Dublin International Hostel and had any ghostly visitors? I wonder if the girls are actually talking to their granny, or if they're just pretending to feel close to her. It's still creepy either way. I will start with my time in Guam. Once my wife and I moved into our house in Guam, we set up the rooms. My son got his own, and we picked one right next to his. After we set up and finally got situated, we got this feeling from our son's room, like somebody or something just wanted us out of that part of the house. So being normal adults, we just ignored everything. But our son would not want to be left alone in the room, kind of like he was in pain or being scared. But once we left the room, he would relax and return to his normal 3-month self. Anytime we would be in his room, the feeling came back. I would pass it off as a new house, gotta get used to it. I never got used to it, neither did my wife or son. The presence in the corner of the room started to take over his whole room. Anytime we would walk past the room from any direction, the feeling would come back, kind of like daring us to confront it. The first confrontation of this ghost was one I'd never forget. It was close to 1 a.m. and everyone was asleep at the time. I was walking past my son's room when I noticed this bright light illuminating the room for a second, then disappear like a flash of light. It might have been an orb, but it happened so fast that I couldn't tell. But there was definitely a flash of light, so I went into the room to investigate. The room was pitch black, except for the window that barely kept the room visible. But what I saw in front of the window still haunts me to this day. Outside the house, there is a tree that faces the window. After making sure that I didn't wake up my son after walking into the room, my attention immediately turns to the tree outside the window. My heart was pounding. I could have sworn I saw a bearded man in a raincoat sitting on the tree, just staring at me. Instinctively, I ran to turn on the lights. My son wakes up crying, and I look out the window at the tree, and nobody is there. My first thought was that it was an intruder, so after calming my son down, I went to my room where my wife was sleeping, gently woke her, and handed her my son. I told her to stay quiet and calm, and I took a baseball bat and headed out the door. There was absolutely nobody on the property, and it was dead quiet. Nothing but the sounds of a calming wind. I even remember hearing owls, but that was it. I went back into our house, confused, but still alert. I remember I was so scared that someone was stalking us that I didn't sleep, and I stayed up the entire night as if I were a soldier. Finally, we get orders to leave, and we were happy to get off the island. Fast forward, and we get our house in New Jersey. My wife is at her mom's house. It's me and my son in the new house. I get the house set up. We had a baby a couple months before we left the island, so she gets her own room with the same crib from Guam. The first night my son and I finally get to relax, we hear the sounds of boxes shifting and stomping on the floor. I brush it off as something fell from a box. When I go up to the second floor room, I open the door. Right across the door is a window, and in the reflection is me and a bald guy that is smiling. I shut the door and thought it was my imagination, so I open it again to make sure. Not surprisingly, nothing was there, but it freaked me out. I went back downstairs to shake it off, and as I sat back on the couch, I saw in the reflection of the entertainment center glass door that same bald guy just sitting on the stairs and watching me like a hawk. Well, I just shut my eyes and opened them again, and he disappeared. Later on down to our time in the house, my kids started complaining of a bald guy walking in their rooms, scaring them, and making them wake up. They came to us, wanting the bald mean guy to leave them alone. So I told them, if he comes back and scares them, to tell him to go away and leave them alone. So I wake up one night to the kids yelling, "Go away. We don't like you." And that was the last of the bald guy scaring the kids. I think that was the time I boxed up the crib from Guam and got rid of it. I would say this is a story of a haunted house, but it isn't. Until about 10 years ago, it was just a haunted house in my book. I met my husband over 30 years ago. He told me about a house he used to live in that had some very strange happenings in it. It was local, but he never wanted to go anywhere near it. He said that it was very old and had been built by a young groom who had some of the wood and granite that made the fireplace sent from Ireland. Anyway, the story is that when he married his wife, she came with her mother, a real shrew. She harped at him and distressed his wife to the point where he went mad and killed them both, then ran screaming that the demons of the house made him do it. My husband's family moved into the house in the early 60s. During the years they lived there, they heard doors closing and footsteps on the stairs, as well as the smell of coffee and frying bacon in the middle of the night. His mother was quite a gardener, but could never get flowers to grow in the yard. He said the whole family was quite uncomfortable in the home and eventually moved. We had been together for a few years when we heard that the property had been sold for a mini storage lot. We were talking about it one evening with my sister and some friends. When my husband told the story, the friends asked to see the house. I'd never seen it to this point, and I'll admit, was more than a little bit curious. We finally talked him into going, and away we went. When we turned onto the street, I got a really creepy feeling, but we pulled up to the house, and I was terrified. There was not a living blade of grass or anything else on that lot. We live in Washington State, and this was March. The house was dark and very ominous. I refused to get out of the car. So did my sister. The guys, 3 of them including my husband, took a flashlight and headed around to the back of the house to see what they could see. After a few minutes, we saw a flash of light on the second floor. In the window on the second floor, they all swear that they saw an old lady's face with long gray hair staring at them through the window. A few minutes later, we saw the front door open, but nobody came out. After a few minutes more, they returned to the car. We commented on the fact that we had seen the light, and they told us they had never turned it on. Then we asked them why they didn't come out the front door. They told us it was locked, and they had tried it before going around back. I was always skeptical about the stories connected with the house, but after they tore the house down, the mini storage was plagued by problems and eventually went out of business. The property sits abandoned and buried. Still nothing lives there, and it's still as creepy as it was years ago. Curiosity led to unknown spirits following me home. Up until the past few years, I became a true believer. I've always felt that I had a special gift, or I could sense energy, especially waves, and other sorts of things. I've had countless moments where I've thought of something random that was about to happen, whether it was a thought, feeling, song, whatever. But aside from that, I know that there are several unexplained factors of this earth, such as life after death. Many of us feel as though we know everything, and are so easy to dismiss that ghosts, energies, and spirits exist. There is so much outstanding proof that there has to be paranormal activity on this earth, along with the dead. Anyway, I've visited some haunted sites, and one of them is in my hometown, and that's a whole different story. But this one time, I went to a place called Dudley Street in Bedford, Massachusetts. Supposedly, there were nuns that practiced witchcraft there about 100 years ago. These nuns were chased down by some guy who hung some of them and others slit their throats. Legend has it that there was a house deep in the woods where these nuns practiced their witchcraft. Ever since these nuns' murders, the house started sinking into the ground. The second floor of the house is now at the ground level. The street begins very normal and thickly settled, with nice houses and fields, but as you keep going, the road gets darker and narrower. As you keep going, you get this creepy, eerie feeling. Ever since, I felt as though I was followed home with that fear. I've seen a few strange things happen there, but not so much until I got home. About 2 summers ago, I was relaxing in my room until I got this overwhelmingly uneasy feeling. I knew I wasn't alone. I tried to ignore this feeling and go to bed. Right when I was laying down, my bed faces the window. I see this huge orb, the width of my fist, floating around my window, then darting in through my room. Too big to be a firefly. I knew it wasn't a car. I knew it wasn't a reflection. I'm not the type of person to blow things out of proportion. I tried to debunk it, but I just couldn't. I freaked out after staying completely still in my room. A few nights later, it was about 3 a.m., and I felt this coldness come over me. I suddenly woke up, and I looked around my room. Then I looked at the corner of my room, and there was a tiny black shadow hovering remotely. It wasn't a shadow of anything, because there is nothing near that corner. I turned on the lights. Of course, nothing was there. Then I switched the lights back off, and no more shadow. I knew I was wide awake when I saw that shadow. Many times in the night, the room will originally be warm, but I will feel something stroking my hair, and a bitter coldness blow against my skin. I've seen images in my mind and in my room of angry faces that weren't just my imagination just before I'm going to bed. I sometimes hear very, very soft voices conversing. I know it's a woman's voice because I thought it was my mom, who was asleep. It was later when I found out that, also according to legend, once you visit Dudley Street, you feel as though you're followed home. This is according to your website too. I didn't know that, but know it makes sense. These occurrences are still happening today. In July of 2008, I went to Sedona, Arizona on vacation with my mother. At the time, I'd been through several surgeries. Although I was not ill, I was in quite a bit of pain, and I hoped that the vacation would do me some good. One afternoon during our stay, we decided to hike around Bell Rock. About halfway through the hike, we stopped to rest and drink some water. We paused for several minutes to look at the view and catch our breath. I was facing away from the trail when we decided to continue on our way, and so I turned around to head back out. When I turned, there was a man standing very close to me in a long blue tunic type shirt. I turned and backed up to let him by me on the trail, but when I turned again, he was gone. I looked around and said to my mom, "That was odd. There was a man," and as I said the words, I felt the coldest chill pass through my body. In July, I became very dizzy and needed to sit down. We found a tree to sit under, and as the dizziness passed, I realized that I was suddenly out of pain. I had no pain. I still felt fairly disoriented, and so my mother was asking me about the experience, and so I told her that the man had been wearing some sort of a long blue shirt, and as I told her this, a large flock of some sort of blue jay or scrub jay with brilliant blue feathers filled the tree. I believe that I was visited by a shaman who knew how to relieve my pain. I lived pain-free for several weeks after that. I've searched for stories of legends of a shaman in a blue tunic, but I've never been able to find anything. If anyone has any information on him, I would love to hear it. I know this isn't the scariest story in the world, but I thought it was the most special experience I've had. Thank you. This is my first story here. I live in a small town in Southwest Virginia. The first story takes place at a business, up a hill, about 50 or so feet from where we live. One night, my brother and I walked up to the business on the hill, above our house. Our destination was a soda machine in front of a garage. While my brother was getting a soda, I happened to look across Main Street, and I noticed something in the shadow of a tree beside the insurance building. I swear people I'm not lying when I say it. It was huge. It looked like a shadow person, yet it wasn't human. Now please don't laugh when I say that it looked like a stereotypical werewolf. It proceeded to run on two legs to the nearest shadow of a house and disappeared. I alerted my brother, then we quickly ran back home. According to my brother, the shadow wolves seemed to follow him, even chasing him at times. He can see them in more detail though. They are more solid to him. I remember one night, I was home alone while he was out for a walk. All of a sudden, he was beating on the front door, begging for me to unlock it. I let him in, and he was gasping and shaking. He was scared out of his mind. You could see it in his eyes. When he calmed down, he told me that he heard a loud splash in the creek beside him. He turned to see the shadow wolf lumbering after him up the bank. Another occasion of seeing something strange. It was a bright and sunny day outside. My brother's girlfriend and I were exploring the basement of an abandoned house, which was up the street from ours. The basement was pitch black, except for the spilling in from the openings where the windows used to be. The basement was quite large too, in fact. The girlfriend entered first, curiously looking around. I entered a couple seconds later, my attention drawn to the windows, just as something huge and black jumped through the opening without making a sound. Then, there was nothing there but the woods which could be seen through the window. Before I could relax, it returned, peering in the window like it was lying on the ground. I shudder to this very day when I think about what I saw. It kinda looked like a shadow person, but way more solid than the ones I've seen before. It was human-shaped. I could see no nose or mouth, or even ears. What I could see was its eyes. It had golden cat-like eyes. It just stared at me for a few seconds before it took off. I did feel like it was a bit annoyed at being disturbed. The house we lived in was across the street from the house we saw that being in. Our house used to be a miner's bathhouse or something. I don't really remember the term the locals used. The house had lockers and showers in the basement. It was extremely dark and creepy. I would never go to the basement alone. I even heard that one of the other rooms used to be a barbershop for them. The house across the street from that, I really don't know much about. I do remember an older, dark-haired lady living there when we were little kids. There was a store and an old post office in the building next door many years ago. My brother's boyfriend at the time helped run the store back in the 80s. My uncle and aunt now live in a house near the bank in Auburntown. When I was a little girl, my best friend Steven and his family lived there. They bought the house and were told that the previous owner, an elderly lady, still haunted the house. They put little faith in the story and never let it bother them. I remember playing in Steven's room and smelling an old lady smell, like medicine and lilac perfume. We never felt threatened by a presence at all. The smell would usually fade away just as quickly as we smelled it. However, one night, after the family had gone to bed, Steven's mother was awakened by the sound of toys making noise in Steven's room. Steven had one problem. He was highly susceptible to nosebleeds. The slightest bump would set off a massive flow of blood. Steven's mother thought it was strange that he was awake and playing with so many noisy toys at once in the middle of the night. Also, the rocking chair in his room where she would often read him bedtime stories was rocking so hard that it was banging against the wall. She ran down the hall to his room, and when she opened the door, the toys went silent. The rocking chair slowed down. She looked at Steven in his bed and saw that his nose was bleeding very badly, and it was going down his throat. He might have drowned in his own blood if the very sweet lady's ghost had not raised such a racket that night. About a year ago, when I was 16, I decided I was sick of sharing a room with my little sister. Because we didn't have enough bedrooms in the house, I decided to move into an old caravan, which was only a few steps away from the back door of the house. I've had many experiences since then, which I believe to be paranormal. I had my dog in the caravan the night that I saw the ghost. When I woke up the next morning, I had the most vivid memory of waking up in the middle of the night. I saw the top half of a man attempt to go through one of the cupboards that are in the caravan, but he was unable to. He fell backwards after crashing into the cupboard and then disappeared. He was elderly, with the top half of his head bald, but with a ring of hair around the back of his head. He was wearing an old-fashioned, light brown tartan jacket. As I said, I only saw the top half of his body, about from the belly button up. My dog didn't wake up at all, and I myself didn't feel neither frightened or threatened, so I feel that the ghost was not evil. When I told my mother, she really didn't believe me, but my dad showed me a picture of his father, who had died about 30 years ago. He looked very similar to the ghost I saw. In addition to this, about 3 or 4 months later, I woke in the middle of the night for no particular reason. As I lay there, attempting to go back to sleep, I heard what sounded like footsteps on the roof of the caravan. My parents gave the explanation of the heat or cold compressing the metal roof, but this doesn't explain why it sounded like human footsteps across the roof. There were about 5 steps, and it sounded sort of like someone was swaggering. This experience did frighten me, and even when the footsteps stopped, I couldn't sleep for hours afterwards. Another night, I woke at exactly 2 a.m. in the morning to the sound of a backfiring car. I pulled back the curtain to one of the windows, which faces the road. What I saw was the outline of an old pickup truck moving very slowly down the road in front of my house. This may sound normal, but it gave me an eerie feeling, and when I lay back down, I could hear the rumbling of the truck for a half hour after that, even though when I looked out the window again, the truck was gone. I found it odd that I could still hear the truck for at least a solid half hour, even after I had passed the house. It felt paranormal to me. This most recent event may not be paranormal, but it is eerie. Just recently, I woke up at 4:12 a.m. I'm still in the caravan. I fell asleep about a half an hour later, but when I woke, I found out that one of my dad's friends had died that very morning. Apparently, He woke up at 4 in the morning, and his wife went to fix him breakfast. His job required an early start, and when she returned about 10 minutes later, he was dead. Is it a coincidence that I woke up at 4:12 in the morning? That may very well be the exact time he died. All these experiences almost began when I moved into the caravan, and although most of them are frightening, the old man's ghost didn't scare me in the least. We don't have any past records on previous owners of the caravan, but I feel that maybe someone has died in there, and a restless spirit continues to be earthbound. When I was 5, I slept in the old camper we owned, and my great-grandma slept in the camper with me. We had the stove light on. I woke up in the middle of the night and saw a figure of a boy. He was holding something, but I couldn't quite guess at the time what it was. Turns out, there was a pair of binoculars and a $2 bill, but it gets creepier. I woke my grandma up and told her that there was someone in the camper. The stove light was off and the doors were locked. She turned a flashlight on and looked around with it. She didn't see anything, so she told me I was dreaming and to go back to sleep. But she had a feeling, not a scared feeling, an odd feeling. The next morning I told my mom, my dad, and my great-grandpa. They just instantly dismissed me and said there was no box of any sort around the house, that they know where they put things, and they're not going to believe a little 5-year-old kid. Now get this, and I can understand if some of you are skeptical, because it doesn't sound realistic at all, but I tell you, this did happen. My dad gets a phone call from some guy, but the creepiest part was, it was just a whisper. He just said he needed his box, and he hung up. It was a 15-second phone call, long enough to say that, and it was kind of staticky. I don't know what that meant, or if this means anything at all, but I wonder if that kid grew up and became a ghost, and as he became a ghost, he somehow transmitted his voice to the phone and actually spoke to us. I know this sounds ridiculous, but believe me, it actually happened. Or you may not believe me, but whatever the case, I know my truth, and that's exactly what happened. I live in a place called New Eton in England that has a lot of old history going back hundreds of years. It's also where George Eliot, the writer, was brought up. Well, because it is old, people around here say that there are quite a few haunted places to go to, including Arbury Hall, where she was brought up, and another place nearby called Adsley Castle that is supposed to be haunted by the young lady Jane Grey. You know, the one that was queen for only 11 days, and then got beheaded by the King of England. Well, anyway, here's my story. It must have been about 2.5 years ago now, when me and my friend couldn't get to sleep late at night, so we thought about having a late night jog into the country, towards the ruins of Adsley Castle. As we started jogging towards Adsley Castle, at about 1:30 in the morning, I started to feel somewhat scared at the thought of going towards the macabre ruins. Even in daylight hours, it looks eerie and oppressive. And with the 600-year-old church next to it, can you blame me for feeling nervous at the time? So, as we were jogging down these narrow country roads, I was starting to think back to the other times when I've been to the castle in the daytime, and the overpowering sadness of the place, and the cold spots too. Should I go back? I thought. But no, me and my buddy carried on towards the lake nearby, and then towards the old run-down empty village. We started to hear a faint hard tapping sound, like metal hitting metal, coming from somewhere in the village or the church near the castle. Now, due to this situation, we started to feel somewhat scared and apprehensive about approaching anywhere near the village, let alone the castle. So we walked towards the phone box nearby and played around on the phone for a while until we felt more confident. Now, you must remember that this place is in the middle of the country and there is nobody that lives nearby. It was just me and my friend in the greenery of the fields, the darkness of the woods, and the closeness of the ruined castle, church, and village. Anyway, there we were, having a bit of fun on the phone, when all of a sudden, we felt as if somebody was watching us. At the same time, it got very cold in the phone booth. Me and my friend Simon looked out of the plain glass booth all around us, but could see nothing at all, but the feeling was still there. But me and my friend just laughed it off and said it was all in our minds. So we started to play around on the phone again, until all of a sudden, we heard footsteps walking towards us, getting louder, as if somebody was wearing heavy leather boots, but nobody was there. The footsteps got louder and louder, until they went past the phone booth and on, until they stopped. Now, we were absolutely petrified and scared beyond belief. There was still nobody there. Now the footsteps were coming back again, and doing the same thing all over again. Plus, the sound of the footsteps was getting louder, no doubt about it. By the time we had the courage to run out of the booth and sprint all the way back home, it must have gone past us at least 4 times, and it was getting much louder too. However, just before the last time we heard the stomping, I could have sworn from the distance I saw a man in shining armor, but he looked very transparent and blurry. Like, it seemed like this person was slowly fading away, but you could see him just enough to make out it was a person, almost like a failing projector. It didn't last very long, and I asked my friend if he saw it, but he said no. This story is all true, and I can still remember every detail of that night, like it was only yesterday. When I was between 3 and 4 years old, I shared a home with my mom and dad. There were many nights where I would wake up screaming, until my mom or dad would come into my room to calm me down. They were sure that it was my Spider-Man poster on the wall across from my bed that scared me. Maybe they were right. However, one night, I will never forget. I was put to bed on the bottom bunk of my bunk bed. It was a hot night, so I leaned up against the wall for comfort, because it was cool to the touch. As I was going to sleep, I slid my right hand and arm down between the wall and bed, in order to get even closer to the wall. No sooner was my arm and hand dangling beneath the bed, than something grabbed it and pulled very hard. I leapt up, freeing my hand and screaming bloody murder. My dad came into the room and eventually calmed me, convincing me that I'd imagined it all. Nothing else occurred that night. And the next day, when I persisted, my dad said it must have been a cat or a bug hitting my hand. I assure you, I knew the difference, even then. Nothing else occurred in this house to me that I can recall. Years later, I was asking my mom about it to see if she recalled the incident. She did, and told me something she never had. She said one night, late, she had gotten up to go to the bathroom. She was pregnant with my sister, and having to go several times each night. She walked through the dining room in the darkness towards the bathroom. She said she saw something whitish and misty hovering over the dining room table. She immediately turned and hurried back to bed, scared to death, with the hair on her neck standing straight up. Years later, my friend Kevin was visiting here where I live now, and he brought this new guy along that I'd recently met. We hung out, and later that evening, we went to take him home. To my surprise, he lived in the same house that I used to, where all the strange things had happened. When we pulled into the drive, I asked him if there was anything weird that ever happened there, not telling him that I once lived there and what had happened. He asked me why I wanted to know that, and I told him that I used to live there and thought something strange had happened once. He then bluntly tells me that the house has a ghost and how it opens their back door at night after they shut and locked it. I then shared my tale and was very happy because then I didn't feel so crazy. This was my first encounter with the paranormal, but not the last, and certainly not the most frightening. I'll try to send those later, if you'd like. When I was a young kid, around about the age of 8, me and my family decided to go on holiday to a place called Matlock for 2 weeks. We arrived at this old farmhouse that was built in about the 17th century and looking the worse for wear. Anyway, on about the second night we were there, we started to hear scratching sounds and furniture moving downstairs, but we just ignored it at first and tried to go to sleep. But on the third night, we couldn't ignore it because the floorboards upstairs started to vibrate and the whole farmhouse was literally shaking. It was more worse for me and my brother because we had to sleep on the floor and we could hear strange mumbling sounds coming from downstairs, and the horse in the field next to the farmhouse was making really weird sounds too. The next morning, my dad put it down to bad plumbing, even though my brother and me were getting nervous. Halfway through the day, I was starting to get bored, so I decided to read a few books from the bookcase in the living room. So I sat down at the table next to the bookcase that faced a window and started reading for a while. I remember at the time reading a book called The Iron Man. All of a sudden, I can remember seeing something standing in front of the window. So I looked up suddenly, and right in front of me was a young pale-looking lady smiling at me. She was wearing white Victorian clothes and a straw-looking hat with flowers in it. I remember sitting there, just looking at this lady for what seemed like ages, even though it must have been only a few seconds. So, thinking it was somebody from my mom or dad, I shouted for them to come downstairs. As I turned to confront my dad to tell him this lady wanted him, she had vanished. So my dad went outside and looked all around the field and at the end of the field towards the bog area, but there was no sign of her, even though we were in the middle of nowhere. Now, I think my dad was starting to get quite spooked as well, because now he kept asking me over and over again, and that I wasn't lying about the woman I had seen. I remember on the fourth and last night, hearing all sorts of weird and distorted sounds, coming from everywhere around the room, where we were sleeping, next to my mother and father's bed. I can also remember my dad kept telling me it was a nearby highway that was causing the vibrations to the house, and there was nothing to be scared about. Funny, considering the nearest highway was about 10 miles away. When we woke up the next morning, my dad was starting to pack all our stuff away, ready for going back home. When I asked him why we were going back home so early, he just said that it was because he thought the place was haunted, and he wasn't going to spend another night there. When I talk to my dad these days about that holiday, and about him leaving early because it was haunted, he just laughs and says don't be stupid. But me and my brother know the truth. This is just one of the many weird experiences that have happened to me over the years, and I'll be posting some very more soon to this great website. Thank you. I grew up in a very old house in Mason, Michigan. From the time I could remember on, weird things would happen there. I used to hear footsteps all the time. If I was downstairs, I would hear footsteps upstairs. I always slept upstairs in one of the 2 rooms. When I slept in the small bedroom, I would hear what sounded like phonographic music, laughter, and glasses breaking. My wind-up music boxes would play by themselves, and I often heard a low male voice say my name. Mine and my parents' pillows would sometimes breathe. Downstairs, we had a sliding glass door leading into a back room, and my parents, visitors, and myself would see a silhouette of a tall man bent over working or walking around. It got so aggravating that we put a curtain up so we wouldn't see it every time we walked by. Sometimes, when we opened the curtain, we would see his face pressed up against the glass. We found out through research that a family had lived there, and the man, John P., had his blacksmith shop at the house. We believe that was the room where he was found dead there by a troop of Boy Scouts. His wife Ida was a socialite and died a very long death upstairs. There was also a woman named Tessa Ann that lived there during that time, and we do not know what happened to her, but we know she had a son named Donald. When my son was a baby, I would often hear a woman's voice in his room talking to him softly, and he would be staring up like there was someone else. One time, I'd come out of the bathroom, upstairs, and saw a woman in a long black dress with sandy brown hair standing in the doorway to the big bedroom. Ida? I saw her and tried to go the other way, but instead, I walked towards her and put my hand out, and she disappeared. It was like I was in a trance or something. Our friends and myself were always nervous about going upstairs for anything, and one time, when my son was very small, I was at the top of the stairs and felt a push. I don't remember the fall, but when I opened my eyes, I was on my back, headfirst down the stairs, and had the baby in my arms still. I have to wonder if something didn't push me and something else flipped me around to save my baby. May have been a reflex. I really don't know. I would have an ashtray in my bedroom and would often go in there to find cigarette butts lined up in a neat row on the bed when no one was even there to do it. My friends would leave their keys on the table, and they wouldn't be there when they go to leave. We'd search the house, and later find them where they had been left, even though we already looked there. I had several occurrences of someone knocking on my door, and as I didn't have a knob or anything on it, it would swing open. I'd hear a couple soft knocks. It would open a little, and I'd close it. Then, as soon as I'd lay it back down, I'd hear louder knocks, and it would swing open farther, and this would progress until the door would slam open and hit the wall. We had a lot more than that happen there, but I don't want to get into everything because that would take too long. We did notice that things would get really bad when there was tension between my mother and myself. However, when everything was calmed down, then all was okay. Weird things happen to us everywhere we go, even though we live apart now, and I have to wonder if we don't just attract that sort of thing, give it energy, or something. But I've never had any weirder stuff happen than what happened in the Mason house. I've been raised with the belief that's supernatural. My family has had a long line of being able to see and hear ghosts, and I never really believed I had the ability until I was 10 years old. My mother and we had went down to Kentucky to visit some family that lives there. My mother is from there. We had spent most of the night talking and finally went to bed. Nothing happened throughout the night, but when I woke up in the morning, I saw a sight that I couldn't believe. I want to believe that this was only sleep paralysis, but I truly feel as though this was a ghost. I woke up and rolled over on my back with my eyes still closed. When I opened my eyes, I saw an elderly woman floating above me. She was wearing a white dress and had long flowing hair. I remember she was smiling at me. Well, being 10 years old, I was terrified, so I screamed for my mother. I told her about the woman that floated through the wall and then disappeared. My mother came in the room and felt the cold, but missed a woman. From this point on in my life, I felt and seen ghosts. I'm guessing that this woman was my great-grandmother. The only reason I believe that it is her is because I am named after her, and my mother said that when I was a toddler, I would talk to her. Now, I know this sounds hard to believe, but my mother said that I would say these things that only her and my great-grandmother knew, so I have no choice but to believe this. Thanks for reading, and if this doesn't give you nightmares, I don't know what will. I've been living with a spirit for just over 2 years. I'm an assistant superintendent on a part-time basis, an executive assistant for a recycle company, also a mother and wife. I guess I'm just telling you this so that you know that I'm not someone who has nothing better to do with my time. It all started when a 7th floor resident, who I'll call Bobby, jumped off his balcony and killed himself just over 2 years ago. My sister and I, who also worked here, had to clean up the mess, later finding out that this is supposed to be done by the fire department. His family left a lot of furniture in his apartment. Usually, we give the leftover stuff to the Salvation Army or to a needy tenant. In this case, my sister had just gotten separated from her husband and was in need of a bed. You might think this is kind of morbid. I know I do. She took the bed from the former tenant's apartment for herself to use. In the months that followed, a lot of strange things happened at her place and mine. She lived just down the hall from me. Doors would open and close for no apparent reason. Lights would go on and off. The toilet would flush. I would wake up in the morning to find the kitchen cabinet doors open, and on 2 occasions, the shower turned on. So it sounded like your basic haunting. Last November, my sister moved back to her home country, 3,000 miles over the ocean. A few weeks before she moved, things got worse. Not in the sense that it was dangerous, just that it happened more often. One night, I was down at her apartment with my 2-year-old son. My son was standing in the doorway that led to the living room. He was looking down the hall, as if watching someone walk towards him. It was like he turned around when the person walked past him looking up, suggesting it was an adult. We made a joke of it. I told my son to say hi to the nice man. He turned around and looked in the corner right by the front door and say in his little voice, "Hi." This really freaked me out, so I left. Later that night, I went back without my son. My 8-year-old niece was just leaving to go to her friend's apartment down the hall. As she left, I called out to her to close the door. She did not hear me, and the door stayed open a couple of inches. I was sitting on the couch doing a crossword puzzle and decided to finish my puzzle before going to close the door. 10 minutes later, my sister was in her room getting dressed. She was in the shower. She called me to go and talk to her while she did her hair. I walked to the front door to close it, but it was already closed. This is not unusual. Sometimes this happens. But what I cannot explain is the door was also locked. There is no explanation for this. My sister was in the shower. My niece did not hear me to call her, nor does she have a key or the knowledge to lock the door. It really spooked me. I told my sister, and she also got spooked. She told me she had been hearing noises that did not seem to be coming from anywhere. My sister and I chatted for a couple of hours until my niece came home. I asked her if she locked the door, and she looked at me and said, "Yeah, sure," with my finger, being 8 with a smart mouth. I left about an hour later to go home. At this time, it was approximately 10 p.m. My niece was sleeping on the couch, and my sister was going to finish some painting in the dining area, then go to bed. I'd been home for about 20 minutes when my sister calls me crying. She said that there was someone in her bedroom jumping on the bed. I told her to go and look. She took the phone with her and approached her bedroom. The noise stopped just as she got to the bathroom. When she turned to walk away, the noise started again. She put the phone on speaker so I could hear too. It really sounded like someone jumping on the bed. My sister, trying to make a joke of it, yelled, "Go away, Bobby. Go and spook someone else." 2 minutes later, I heard a noise in my hallway. I was sitting at my computer and looked down the hallway towards the kitchen, and there was Bobby standing just inside my front door. He had on a brown leather jacket and blue jeans, the clothes he was wearing when he died. I was really shocked. I told my sister what I saw and tried to pretend that I was not scared. I said to him, "It's okay, Bobby. You can go now." And then he was gone. My sister was laughing hysterically on the other end of the phone. I tried to calm her down by talking to her, but it did not work. I was kind of glad that she was freaking out, because it did not give me time to freak out myself. I went to my sister and sat with her until the sun came up. Neither of us slept that night. Later that day, we took the bed out to the dumpster at the back of the building, and since my sister only had a few days left in Canada, she slept on an air mattress. That seemed to solve the problem for her, but Bobby has never left my apartment. I do not feel threatened by this presence, but uncomfortable, and my cat is constantly having freak attacks, and my son talks of the man. The stories I'm about to tell you actually happened to a cousin of mine at his college campus. One night, this one guy was lounging around in his dorm while his roommates were out. He was relaxing and reading on his bottom bunk bed when he heard scratchy noises in his room. Wondering what it was, he looked around and didn't see anything unusual. He went on reading again. A few minutes later, the sound started coming around again, just a bit louder. He proceeded to look out his window, where he noticed tree branches hitting the windowsill. Thinking this was it, he went back on reading. The noises stopped just for a few seconds. Then, all of a sudden, the noise came back, and this time, it sounded very close by. He checked out the top bunk and saw a ghostly image of a lady in very antique-looking clothes ran out of his dorm and never came back to live there since. One night, some student decided to have a party on campus. A group of students were on their way to a party when they ran into this girl. She looked like a regular student there, but nobody had seen her before. Anyways, the group tried to get her attention to ask her to the party, but she didn't seem to hear them. They called to her again, but she just kept right on walking. So one of the guys decided to walk up to her. The rest of the group had gone into the building. As she approached the girl, he noticed she was smiling at him. He looked down and saw her face was facing him, but the rest of her body faced the other direction. He screamed and ran back to his friends. The group ran back out and tried to look for the girl, but she was nowhere to be found. When I was little, I used to be able to see spirits. I was never scared of them though. I remember one spirit in particular. Her name was Mimi. Mimi always showed up at nighttime when I was supposed to be asleep. I had a habit of very bad nightmares of people dying, especially my parents. One night, I woke up sweating and in tears when I thought I saw someone standing in my doorway. At first I just saw a mist. That then turned into an old lady. I was able to see through her. At the moment I didn't realize it, but it was Mimi who came back to check up on me, and she had her little dog with her. I watched as she came near my bed. When she was standing right next to me, petting her dog, I felt calmness come over me, and I felt so safe with her there. As she sat down on the corner of my bed, she told me not to fear, that my parents were sound asleep, safe, and sound in their bed. I remember how I still couldn't calm down right away. I was still crying when she put her dog up on my bed with me. At the time, I used to call the dog Pinky, since you could see the pink of her skin under her white fur. I watched Mimi as she went into the hallway and then faded away. I heard from Mimi almost every single night since then, until my 10th or 11th birthday. I'd been playing games with my cousins when we decided to have a race to see who would get outside the fastest. They let me have a head start since it was my birthday. As I headed up the stairs, I heard them right behind me. All the grown-ups were right outside at the time. I ran through the kitchen and went to hit the door handle to go outside, but I missed it. Instead of opening the door, I went through the glass back door. Glass was everywhere. I had cuts all over the place and was bleeding. I ended up passing out, but before I even lost consciousness, I thought I saw a figure of Mimi. It was weird, but then I passed out. Then, when I regained consciousness, I was sitting in a hospital bed, and my family and friends were all around me. They were so concerned, and I was just wondering about what happened to Mimi. I screamed out Mimi, and they were so confused, like they didn't know what I was talking about. I tried to tell them in detail, but they just waved me off and dismissed me like it was stupid or something. They told me ghosts definitely don't exist, and that I was just seeing things because of my injury, but I had told them about the bed incident of me being in my room, and they still waved me off like I was nuts. So that's where the story ends. Nothing really came of it, and after that, I never saw Mimi again. I honestly don't know what she represents. Maybe she's a guardian angel. Maybe she appeared in my dreams and I was just imagining it all. Whatever it was definitely a special incident, and I'll never ever forget it. Hello, I'm Kylie, and I'm 14 years old. I'm going to try my best to tell you my entire story without making it too long to read. In the winter of 1980, my mom and her husband, at the time, moved into a house on a friendly, pleasant street. The first day they moved in there, numerous things happened wrong. First off, my sister Cindy ended up finding out that she had the measles. Secondly, my brother Todd had a very high fever and had to be taken to the hospital that night. The electricity in the house would not work, and this made my whole family rather upset. My mom began to resent the house for no particular reason. She complained to her husband about it so much that they end up violently arguing. He had an emotional attachment to the house in less than a week, while my mom, she was the exact opposite and felt she needed to leave. Regardless of my mom's feelings, she ended up staying there for another 12 years. There are a few incidents that I'd like to focus on particularly. Incident number 1. When my mom and her husband first purchased the house, my brother was just a baby. One night, after hearing sounds coming from the attic, my mom got up from bed to check everything out. Although she did not find anybody or anything in the attic, she did find a man who she can describe rather specifically: blonde hair, brown eyes, and work clothing. He was entering my brother's room. My mom was so shocked to see him that she started to scream and blocked the door to my brother's room. Her husband heard the yelling and came downstairs to see what was the matter, and all he saw was my mom blocking my brother's door. My mom says that as soon as her husband came downstairs, the ghost disappeared. The police came, but did not find any evidence of anyone being there. Incident number 2. My brother, at 5 years old, began complaining that there was a man living in his wall. When my mom calmly asked him why he thought this, he replied, "You know, you saw him when I was a baby. The man who lives in my wall. He eats in there, sleeps in there, everything." My mom was very frightened, but after consulting the child physician about the matter, she was told that I probably had imaginary friends. Incident number 3. I was born in 1985 to my mother's third husband, Howard. My mom tells me that I was a horrible baby who would never stop crying. When I was 3 years old, I became rather curious by the attic, since my parents told me not to go in there. Disobeying them, I went up there instead. An unknown force pushed me into a car seat that my mom had recently stored up there. It locked me in there. For an hour straight, I screamed my mother to unlock me, but she had been outside. When she came inside, she hurriedly ran upstairs and unlocked the seat. I'd never been able to use the lock on that car seat, and it would have been impossible for me to lock myself in there. Incident number 4. My cousin Heather and I go outside to look at the clouds. In these clouds, we spot 2 figures that barely resemble clouds, but instead drawn images. One of a baby, the other of a small dog. We saw them so clearly that we ran inside crying, only to see that our parents were watching the news. That same day, a baby and a dog died together. We had seen the images at the exact same time that the deaths were announced. Heather and I could always see the ghost. He was always around. He enjoyed watching us play with our Barbie dolls. He'd stand right by us as we played. We tried to get him to leave, but he never would. Eventually, we got used to him being there, and we were not frightened by it. We never told our parents about him, because we both felt that he wanted us to keep him a secret. One night, my family came running upstairs because they heard me screaming. My sister says that my screams were so violent, it's as if I was being murdered. When they asked me what was wrong, I told them that someone was in trouble. I told them that a ghost on the wall told me that someone was dying. I also told them that I kept seeing images of babies on my ceiling. My family was very frightened. I slept with my parents that night. The next day, I found out that my teacher, at the time, had been in a major car accident. She was pregnant at the time, which explains the images of the babies. The next incident. My older cousin and I dared my cousin Heather to come into the attic with us. She would not come up there, and so my older cousin pulled her into the attic with me. And once she was in there, she seemed fine. My older cousin headed downstairs, leaving me and Heather to search the attic for my missing doll. We looked everywhere until we heard a loud scream that sounded as if it was coming from a human. We ran downstairs. Our parents, trying to keep us calm, told us it was probably something we stepped on. Incident number 7. I continued to look for that doll in the weeks to come. only to find it outside, torn to shreds. In the other incident, one night, while my sister was watching a late-night movie, the rest of us heard her screaming and ran down to see if she was okay. There was a bat in the house, and it was attacking her. She had a towel over her head and was running from it, shaking and crying. My dad ran after it with a fishing net and luckily was able to get it trapped on our porch. My sister later told us that it appeared from out of nowhere. Later on, my mom runs into the lady who sold us the house. As soon as the lady sees my mother, tears fill up her eyes. She begins to cry and tells my mom how sorry she is for letting her buy that house. She too knew it was haunted and had many bad experiences with it. My mom and her had a big conversation concerning the whole thing, and the lady told my mother that she too had seen a man with blonde hair, brown eyes, and work clothing. We found out from my mom's second husband that the man who built the house died by falling from a ladder. He was not finished with the house, which is obvious. Now that we think back to the unfinished stairway, work clothes, I wonder if he had blonde hair and brown eyes. Now, the story I'm about to relate is unnerving to me. However, to you, it may not be. In fact, it may not have been real at all, but it sure seemed real to me. My mom's mother, Nanny, lived with us for as long as I can remember, so naturally, my brother and I were very close to her. She passed away from bone cancer in October of '93. It was very disconcerting, because the woman she was at the end was not the woman she was in life. In December of '96, I was home for the Christmas holiday from college. I was staying in my old room. My parents were being transferred to Texas shortly, so a lot of things were packed up. My room was completely bare, except for my desk and my bunk beds. My bunks were set up in an L shape. Normally, I would sleep on the bottom bunk, but I had the mattress at school, so I was sleeping on the top bunk. It was about 11:30 in the a.m., and I was somewhere between awake and sleep when someone leaned over me. That's when I awoke to the most hideous sight I'd ever seen. It was my nanny, but she had the most messy hair in the world, long, dangly black hair, and it looked like her eyes were bulging out of her sockets. They were red. She was even bloodied on her face. She kept staring at me, and as she stared at me, she slowly opened her mouth, and bugs crawled out of it. A few seconds go by, and I'm finally awake. Or was I? At that moment, I could have sworn I was awake, but apparently I felt like I was sleeping. It might have been a sleep paralysis incident, but I'm not quite sure. It definitely sounds like the details of one. The thing was, I knew that was Nanny. I swear that the woman was in the room with me, and it's a dead certain feeling, not even something that I can't explain. I went downstairs and had breakfast after this happened. While having breakfast, I chatted with my mother about what happened. We both chalked it up to a very vivid dream. Well, this happened the Monday before New Year's. That Wednesday, I took my dad's car and went to hang out with my then girlfriend. We were driving around and had gotten into an argument. I was on an unfamiliar road, and with the combo of not paying attention, I ran a stop sign. As I was running the stop sign, I could have sworn I saw a woman in white standing in front of the car. We were then hit by a car going about 50 miles an hour. The car hit us so hard that it sent our car about 65 to 70 feet and split the radiator in half. The car had hit on my side. The police said that if the car had hit 3 inches closer, I would have been killed instantly. I walked out with a minor cut on my arm and a bruise on my hip. My girlfriend bruised her collarbone, and the other weird thing was that there was other traffic in the opposite lane, and our car did not get hit. How does this all tie together? Well, my mom, the night before I got into the wreck, had a dream about my nanny, so she believes that the experience I had was her protecting me. I know that sounds absurd, considering what I experienced previously was a really dramatic encounter with my grandma. A little background though, my great Nana, my mom's Nana, was a very strong maternal presence. She had 8 children and raised them pretty much by herself. My mom and my Nana lived with her for a long time, so they were very close. My great Nana passed away the day before I was born in a hideous car accident. My interpretation of the facts is as follows. When I was having that experience in bed, and I saw that hideous woman, it was my nanny, and she was in the car crash, so she was showing her form to me. It was almost like a ghostly premonition, and she was warning me of what might come next. Of course, I had no idea what was coming next, and at the time, I was thinking how bizarre it was to have this experience and how freaked out of my mind I was. Then, when I got into my own car crash, I truly believed that I ran that stop sign, and before I even got into the crash, the woman who was there, who flashed before me, was my nanny. Well, anytime my mom or Nana dreamt of my great Nana, something bad would follow within a few days. So based on all of this, my mom thinks that my Nana protected me. I'm not sure what I think. I just know that she was in the room with me that day. As a young kid, I'd often go on arduous walks to the grocery store with my older brother in the summertime. The walk is often an exhausting process because you have to walk up and down a lot of hills and cut through this golf course before you get to the store, which can take an hour. For someone 9 years old, this wasn't such a good idea, especially in July when the humidity around here is at an all-time high. My experience is highly unusual, and I'm not entirely sure what this experience could be classified as, but it's really creepy, and I genuinely believe that if I hadn't gone with this man, I wouldn't be alive today. Confused? Don't worry, you will understand soon enough. On this particular day, my brother and I decided to head out to the store for another one of our walks. I don't think I drank much water that day, but I remember wanting to go because I wanted to get some snacks. Anyway, about 20 minutes into our walk, right before we had to pass through the golf course, I started to get extremely fatigued and weak. My brother looks back at me and asks if I'm okay. The heat was starting to take its toll on me, and I eventually collapsed. I don't remember how long I was knocked out for, but it definitely seemed like it was a while. But this is where it gets insane. For a second, I thought I had woken up and was just aimlessly staring at the sky. Suddenly, I was staring at this intimidating presence in the sky. It was a man from the early days. He was wearing Victorian-era clothing on, suit and tie, and a top hat. He also had a classic car with him that was also floating in the sky next to him. The car was from the same era as him. Anyway, the man started to reach out his arm for me, signaling me to get into the car with him. I don't remember speaking. All I remember was mouthing the words no and he started to get increasingly agitated. You could see it in his eyes. Again, he waved his arms, but more violently. It really seemed as if this man really wanted me to get in the car with him, and I wasn't having any part of it. And that's when I figured out what he wanted me to do. This guy looked absolutely infuriated right now, because it seemed like he knew, now, that he couldn't convince me to get into the car with him. He looked at me one last time, pointed at me again with the most angry expression on his face, then simply gave up. He literally got back into his car, even noticed that he slammed the door. When he slammed the door, that's when I woke up. My brother was continuously shaking me, and I felt delirious as I slowly started to get back to reality. I was still near the golf course, sweating, and my brother asked me if I was okay. He said he had performed CPR on me because my heart had stopped beating. Even though he was only 14, his health class had given him CPR training. I believe the man in the sky was a fallen angel, or some dark presence luring me into the afterlife. When I made this realization, it seems his plans to go get me to go with him were foiled, and so, whoever had sent me to go get me would have been upset, and thus, probably why he was upset as well. I believe this was a creepy near-death experience, and I highly believe it was paranormal, a ghost or entity of some sort. Some might say that this could be just a hallucination, but if my heart stopped beating, why did I have this vision? I'm not an expert on NDEs in the slightest, but what I do know is that many people report a series of calmness and peace. Here, however, I felt absolute dread and apprehension. Anyway, who really knows what this really was? But I truly believe that if I went with this mysterious figure, I would have died, and I wouldn't be writing about this encounter today. I don't know if you're interested in stories from around the globe, but I thought I might as well give it a go. I live in Northern Ireland, and have done so all my life. I come from Tyrone. This is where my story comes from. After a night spent out, one friend was leaving another friend home to Burnpub, and traveling the road from Dugaman, through Moy, and out another few miles to Burnpub where he lived. It was late, and the road was windy, very rural, and old houses scattered around. The roads are bendy and prone to fog patches, and when wet, can be treacherous. The bloke who was driving the car suddenly swerved and screamed. They somehow got the Burnpub to my friend's house, and they set him down and tried to get him calm enough to get him talking. He was shaking and sweating, even though it was a winter's night, and we aren't that warm over here in the summer. He eventually said that when he was driving, someone ran out in front of his car. The creepiest part was that he said this person was dressed like a nun. He locked eyes with the nun, who looked at him deep into his eyes with fright for a moment's time, and he swerved to try to avoid her, but when this figure finally reached the middle of the road, it simply disappeared into thin air. The friend traveling home with them hadn't seen a thing, and neither of them drank, so it wasn't that. There wasn't any fog on that particular bend, and we didn't hear about any other stories involving this mysterious nun. Not even about a past accident or such taking place there. We aren't sure if this was just his imagination, but he never really had much of an imagination. We just still aren't sure. Hey there, before you turn the video off, can you please like, share, and comment? Comment on this video, engage with likes. Do what you can to keep the video alive, because the algorithm will love you, and it will love me and push my video out so I can get 30K subscribers. We can get it together if we do it. So like, share, comment, and subscribe. Seriously, guys, please like, share, and subscribe. It really helps.